asking you in August of '86 whether or not it was clear that you had no intention to take custody of the children.
It was after the bifurcation. Dan had gotten sole custody, no visitation. I couldn't just go over there and take them.
But you didn't want them either. Did you write in your diary, for example, when I'm assured of financial security, my house, car, social standing, I will begin to discuss custody. For now, I am too enraged by your actions to be around the children or to accept any responsibility for them.
That's exactly right. That's
Okay.
right.
So you didn't
Very upset, and I had no security, as I've explained earlier, about anything. And I wanted to get the security set up first as a package deal with the children, because I was just too nervous to take on the children without anything. I couldn't. I couldn't.
In August of 1986, you were living in Calle de Cielo. You've been living there for 16 months, correct?
Yes.
You also had 3 cars at the time, correct?
Maybe.
And you indicated that you had to be assured of your social standing before you would begin to discuss custody. How was it that you were going to be assured of your social standing?
Your Honor, objection. If she's reading, I'd like to know which volume of the diary.
It's in volume 1, August of '86.
You want to see the page, Mr. Rhodes? Show them the page.
How was it that you were going to be assured of your social standing before you would discuss custody of the children?
I'm glad that you mentioned that. Social standing was not what I meant. What I meant was identity. You know, I didn't know if I wasn't yet Mr. Broderick's ex-wife. I didn't know who I was in the world. I didn't know where I stood. I didn't know his name was still on the house, so I wasn't secure that that was my house. I had
Okay,
no
excuse me.
definition.
You did say social standing.
I
You didn't
said
say
social
identity.
standing. I meant identity.
That she should be allowed, when there's a question to, when they're asked, what did you mean, she should be allowed to explain what she meant.
Objection sustained. Let her finish her answer, Mrs. Wells, and let her, you can ask another question.
Did you finish the answer?
No, it's a pretty complicated answer. I didn't know who I was. I had lost my social friends through Dan and the legal system.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm listening.
I had a total lack of identity, and the financial settlement to me would have been day one of building a new Betty Broderick. But I didn't know how to build a new Betty Broderick until I got the definition of who I was and where I was going to live and how I was going to work. And that's what I meant by that. It wasn't social stand.
It was your choice to wait and make sure about your claims of financial security before you took custody of the children.
At
Was your
several
choice.
junctures, I said I wouldn't take the children. Never was I, in fact, offered the children. Never.
You never made a request for the children. You specifically did not make a request for the children. For example, when you were represented by Mr. Hargraves in 1986, did you?
Mr. Hargreaves, as we've described, was on the job for one court appearance. We never got to discussing the kids.
And that was a court appearance where you could go in and you could request custody of the kids. In fact, he talked to you about the fact that if you took custody of the kids, you'd even get more money. But you didn't even want to do that.
No, that's not correct. We
That's
went
not
in
correct.
on an emergency support order because of being denied any money in November of '86 and December of '86. Dan had cut it off entirely. There's a legal word for what it was, how he had an emergency hearing. That covered no other subjects about community property or children or visitation, not even mentioned. That was strictly emergency support here.
And it was your choice to have Mr. Hargraves then go in for this emergency support as opposed to going in and also asking for custody. There was nothing that prevented him from doing that.
Not as
Objection.
opposed
Call for
to.
conclusion and speculation.
Sustained.
You never made a request of Mr. Hargraves to make a motion for custody, correct?
Mr. Hargreaves wasn't on the job long enough. He did the emergency
That's-
support
excuse me.
hearing, and he was fired.
Yes or no? Did you ever make a request of Mr. Hargraves for custody of the children?
No.
And in fact, when you went up and hired Mr. Glucksman in Los Angeles, he went ahead and he wrote up a whole motion for custody of the children and filed it, and you were angry about that. You complained about it with Mr. Hargraves, that you had no intention of seeking custody of the kids, and you were angry that Mr. Glucksman had done that.
No, what happened with that was Mr. Glucksman was on the job again for a little short period of time, and he started the works to get the whole divorce done. He was going to start discovery. He listed depositions to be taken, and we were going to go to court for the kids and things. And then Tricia Smith came along, and all the dates that Mr. Glucksman put on were vacated. And then Tricia Smith started doing things her way. And
May I simply ask you whether or not you complained to Mr. Hargraves about the fact that Mr. Glucksman
no,
had filed a motion for custody without your permission?
no,
Never did
that's
that?
not true.
Well, moving into 1987, with respect to custody of the children, you had the meetings in March with Dr. Roth. And it was very clear at that time, again, that you did not want custody of the children when you had your meetings with Dr. Roth,
I
correct?
was a total wreck by the time I met Dr. Roth, and I could not take the children emotionally at all until I got a settlement. I was frantic. I'd been thrown in jail. I'd gone through all this stuff. He'd cut off all the money. I'd gone through the Glucksman, Hargreaves, Tricia Smith thing. I had liens on my house. I'd given away my necklace, and I was absolutely when I met Ruth Roth. Sorry, how you transcribe that, sorry.
When you met Ruth Roth, it was made clear to you that the issue was custody of the children and trying to do something to settle that for the children, and that you had the option of taking the children at that point, and you said no. You said there was no way you would be the single mother of 4 children. Whether you have your reasons for it or not, isn't it true that you made the choice at that time not to take the children?
Your Honor,
That is
objection.
misstated.
The question is compound.
Overruled, let me answer that.
Did you indicate to Dr. Roth that there was no way you were going to be the single mother of 4 children?
Dr. Roth never offered me the children. She was not in a position to say, here are your kids, Betty, go home now.
Did you
It was
make
a
the statement
discussion.
to Dr. Roth that you were not going to be the single mother of 4 children? That Dan Broderick would die first?
I don't remember making that exact statement. I was an absolute basket case. I was terrified. I was horrified. I was scared. I was upset. The whole Dr. Ruth Roth little segment was a disaster. Every part of it was a disaster.
And, well, let's move on to December of 87. That was in March of 87. In December of 87, again, Dan Broderick had made an offer, tried to make an offer to you to take the children, and again, you refused in December of 1987.
Could you just get a little bit more specific, please?
And did you write in your diary in December of 1987, Dan has new tact of giving me kids. Trouble is, my house does not fit them, and I have no money to support them.
If that's what I wrote in the diary, that's what I wrote in the diary. But I don't remember that particular Christmas or why, or I'm not with you yet on what was going on at that time.
You could just take a look at this diary sheet and just identify if that's your handwriting.
Yes, it's a sheet of the diary. If I could see the rest of the diary, the sheets before, I would know how we got there.
Okay. But you did say in December of 1987 that Dan was trying to give you the kids. But the trouble was your house did not fit them and you had no money to support them. You made that statement.
If that's what that says, yes,
Weren't-
but it's
weren't-
out of context.
Weren't you complaining at that time that it was Dan's house that didn't fit the kids? That it was Dan's house that was in the slums and it wasn't an appropriate house and that your house was much better? Weren't you making statements like that?
We came out of a 5-bedroom house where every child had their own bedroom and we had a master bedroom. That's 5 bedrooms. And each of us after Coral Reef got 3-bedroom houses, which put a master bedroom and a suite and then 2 other bedrooms sharing a bath. So that left the 2 boys in one room, the 2 girls in another room, and all 4 children sharing what was in both houses, a very small bath, 4 kids sharing the one bath. That is not the living arrangements any of us were ever used to, and the kids sharing the closet and everything in the room.
So
So
was that your reason for not taking the children in 1987?
no, but that's the reason for that.
Room?
That's the reason for that, and that's before I built the family room and tried to make my house better for the children. Neither Dan's house nor my house had a family room or enough bedrooms compared to Coral Reef.
Well, so the children had to share a room at Dan's house, right? Danny and Rhett stayed in the same room. They had bunk beds in the same room at Dan's house, right?
Only for a few months because they fought like crazy. And then when somebody moved out, Danny went into that bedroom and Kim was in the maid's room downstairs. And that's how Lee ended up in the pool house, you
Okay.
know?
And
'cause
so
they're-
are you saying there was no room in that house that you were living in to take these children?
No, everything's relative. I could have had 100 people on the floor if that's how they wanted to live, but it wasn't the
You're-
way they were used to living.
Okay.
And I was trying to make the house better for them.
And so your choice in December of 1987 was still that the house was not appropriate enough to take custody of your children.
If that's what that says, that's what I wrote there that day at that time for a reason. I had to
You
fix
also
up my
said-
house. I added things as time went on.
Okay. It was more important to you to fix up your house.
It was more important to me that the
That's
kids,
argumentative, Rob.
Sustain.
You indicated also that not only did your house not fit them, but you had no money to support them, right?
I always said I had no money.
Okay.
I never had
And
any
this
money.
was December of 1987. Your Honor may have marked as people 73, a group of checks.
Tell me how many?
Yes. $14 checks.
So marked.
I'd like to just go through these checks one by one and simply have you identify them as your checks if you would. Referring first to the first check dated November 5th, 1987, written to I. Magnan for $500. Was that a check that you wrote?
Yes,
And on November 9th, 1987, a check to Nordstrom's for $500. Was that a check that you wrote?
yes,
November 11th, 1987, a check to Saks Fifth Avenue for $391.48. Did you write that?
Uh-huh.
November 11th, 1987, a check to Robinson's for $500. Did you write that check?
Mhm.
November 4th, 1987, a check to First Card, your MasterCard, for $1,000.
right,
November 4th, 1987, a check to Great American for MasterCard, $1,000.
mhm.
Is that your check?
These are all my checks.
December 8th, 1987, a check to Nordstrom's for $1,000.
Yes,
December 15th, 1987, a check to Neiman Marcus for $1,000.
yes,
December 21st, 1987, a check to Great American on your MasterCard for $1,000, $1,012.74.
Right.
January 8th, 1988, a check to I. Magnan for $500.
Right.
January 18th, 1988, a check to Robinson's for $500.
Right.
January 8th, 1988, a check to Nordstrom's for $1,000.
this has been a long time, yes.
January 18th, 1988, a check to Neiman Marcus for $550.
Right,
January 18th, 1988, a check to Bowers, which is a jewelry store, for $261.
right.
You did tell Dr. Nelson in 1987, sometime in 1987, that the kids were happy living in their dad's house. Do you recall telling Dr. Nelson that?
I don't know. I went to Dr. Nelson because the children were suicidal, running away, and depressed and unhappy at Dan's house, so I
Do you
don't know why
recall
I told
telling
him that.
Dr. Nelson I don't feel terrible that the kids are living with their father. I have a 3-bedroom house, so the boys would have to share. The kids are happy living in their dad's house.
I could have said that on that day, but I went to him about getting the kids.
And there were times when you got the children for visitation, weekends, for example, that made you angry. You were angry when you would get them. You felt that Dan was using you as a babysitter.
That particular weekend that he dumped them and went to the Ritz-Carlton, and I found out later, yes, I felt that he had made these plans and he didn't have a babysitter, so dump and away he went. That was that, yes.
Well, that was back
Felt
in
that was rude.
1986, that weekend. There were many other weekends in 1987 and 1988 where you felt the same way, where you were angry about getting the kids because you felt he was using you as a babysitter.
I felt he was jerking us all around by not having any plans. I already said I couldn't make any plans, and I never knew till the last minute. And he was totally jerking me around on purpose. If he knew I had plans, I'd get the kids. If I asked for the kids in advance, like the Christmas party or Halloween or something, I could be assured I wasn't getting them. That was the only thing I could count on. But it was just turmoil, and it was driving me crazy. And I was very angry, yes.
Well, you were depressed about or claimed to be depressed about the fact that the kids were coming over, period, because they made such a mess in your house.
My kids always made a mess. They're kids.
And did you tell Dr. Nelson, I'm depressed thinking of the kids coming to live with me for the weekend? They drive me crazy?
No.
Did you tell Dr. Nelson, I'm not comfortable having the kids in my house. If it's not right, I don't want the kids?
If it's not right, I don't want the kids. I don't know what you mean by that. I don't know.
Do you recall talking about Rhett, saying, I don't want to care for him. If I do 10 more years of child care and not take care of myself, I'll end up with nothing. Rhett will have to go back to Dan and do the best he can. I have to take care of myself.
If that's what he wrote down, I guess I said that, but I don't know what I meant by that. Except that I was deteriorating very rapidly myself and I needed help.
Do you recall being angry about the boys coming over to visit you on your birthday in 1986 because it ruined your invites for the day?
No, I don't remember. I don't know what invites are.
Did you write in your diary, supposedly let boys come here for my birthday? Having boys ruined all the invites I had for birthday.
I don't know what that means.
You complained that you weren't allowed to visit the boys, or they weren't allowed to visit you on your birthday, and yet when you had them for your birthday, you complained that they ruined your other plans for the day.
Well, that's what would happen, is I would be told I wasn't getting them on birthday and a particular Mother's Day that I remember. So I'd make other plans on a particular Mother's Day because I couldn't have my children. I invited Brad's mother to town and father and his brother and stuff. And because I couldn't have my own children, I was going to have this nice weekend for Brad's mother. And I made a lot of plans, a lot of cooking and everything, and bang, all my kids show up. And it wasn't that I didn't want to see my children. I wanted to see my children, but it really messed up the whole weekend. And Mrs. Wright felt like she was in the way now because my kids showed up and they left early, and I felt bad about it. It was just mayhem all the time. It wasn't that I didn't want to ever see my children.
Well, do you recall complaining when the boys would come over? In, for example, August of '88, can't do anything social with boys here. House a mess. One into the other. I'm in for all day. Money, 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 even when home. Just like old days, free slave.
Are those pages from my diary?
Yes.
If you're going to keep putting in pages from the diary, we have to put in the whole diary that is a day-by-day demise and destruction of everything. It's just, I'm just going in the toilet
about
here.
this particular day on August the 1st.
I have an attorney appointment at the top of the page, and the boys were here the next day. And then a week later, I can't do anything social with boys here. House a mess. This is the summertime, so they must have been there. One into the other, I'm in car all day. Money, 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 even when home. I don't even know what that means now. Just like the old days, free slave. Those are my notes on August 8th. I don't even know what year.
Your Honor, this might be appropriate time for the vote.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess. At this time, we'll be in recess for 15 minutes until 25 to 11. Please remember the admonition. During the recess, it was brought to my attention by my bailiff that we have two jurors who are a little under the weather. One is apparently substantially ill. It's Miss Correnti, is that correct? No. Oh, you in the back. I'm sorry. They told me it was the lady in the front row, and it's the lady in the back row. It is the lady in the back row. I'm sorry. And you are Miss Correnti, right?
It's not Mr. Francis.
It's not. Oh. Miss Phelps? All right. Also, one of the gentlemen jurors is a little under the weather. He thinks he could probably make it through the day. I've discussed with the attorneys this matter, and they both have informed me that they would like to keep our present jury constituted the way it is, and that they do not have an objection to us taking a recess for the day so that you can recover. And that in that event, we wouldn't be seating the alternates at this time. Is that correct, Ms. Wells and Mr. Early?
Yes, sir.
That is correct.
And you concur in your attorney's decision, Ms. Broderick?
Yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a recess at this time. Now, if any of you aren't feeling well enough to make it tomorrow morning, if you just call us and not try to come in here and tell us that. If you're not well enough to make it, you can just call the courtroom and let my clerk know. And if you call early enough, we'll try to get a hold of the other jurors so that they don't have to drive in also. Obviously, we hope that this is a temporary thing and not a 3-day flu or whatever. With that, then we'll recess for the day. Please remember the admonition. And one other thing I want to mention to you specifically, ladies and gentlemen, I know you're all being careful about not, watching the television news and that sort of thing, but sometimes something can sneak up on you. I know that at some point this week, and I'm not sure if it's tonight or tomorrow or Friday night, 2020 will be doing a segment on this case. I'm not sure what they'll broadcast, but I just would ask you not to watch any of the 2020 program whenever it's on, so that you're not exposed to something and can't get to the TV fast enough to get rid of it. So please be extra careful not to watch that show this week. Please remember the admonition. See you tomorrow morning. We're in recess. Jury, you're present. Mrs. Broderick is not present. The district attorney is not present at their request. Mr. Early is present representing his client, who I understand waives her presence for purposes of this proceeding. Mr. Early, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And Mr. Chuck Irwin representing the Sheriff's Department, is that correct?
Good morning, Your Honor. Charles Irvin on behalf of the sheriff.
Your Honor, Elizabeth Bowman is here. She's also an attorney who's been working on at least the orders for this.
Ms. Bowman? The matters on calendar for the court to consider 10 proposed orders submitted by the defense, who I understand has attempted to gain informal discovery on matters related to the jail incident, and the sheriff, for various reasons, has refused to comply with the informal request, at least as to these 10 areas. And it's on calendar at the defense request for the court to rule on these various orders. Does that accurately state why we're here, gentlemen? And Ms. Bowman?
Yes, it does, except that there were 9 orders that related to the first incident, and I added 10 points since that time, but I gave a copy of that also.
All right, but I have a total of 10, so I have them all.
Yes, you did.
All right. Let's start with the 2 orders involving a Sharon Nobles. I'm not quite sure of the relevance of that. Can somebody enlighten me as to Sharon Nobles?
If I could just very briefly, Your Honor, Sharon Nobles was in the cell before Elizabeth Broderick was in the disciplinary sheriff's cell. Also, the incident that rose, that got it so that Mrs. Broderick was given some disciplinary time that this incident arose out of, was because of an incident that involved Sharon Nobles. And so there was a dispute between her and a deputy, and that's, and obviously this would be part of the evidence to show Mrs. Broderick's reaction, what the sheriff's did, what was reasonable and unreasonable. She was the person who was down in the holding cell. There were some incidents with the marshals down there. There was an incident on the bus where she broke some stuff in the bus, some threats towards my client. And then she arrived at the jail where there was another incident with Ms. Nobles, and then there was an incident that Ms. Broderick got the disciplinary time for.
Well, let's start with the two orders then with regards to her, Mr. Irvin. The first one is for all videotapes of any incidents involving inmate Sandra Nobles. Do any such videotapes exist?
To my knowledge, there are no existing videotapes of inmate Sandra Nobles.
With that by way of background, Mr. Early, is there any sense in me signing this order, or do you want me to sign it in any event?
Well, it just the record can reflect then that what I would like is the court just to have the order and that it's been complied with. Or at least their representation has been complied with, since there is no videotapes.
And I assume you have no objection to the order then, Mr. Irwin, is that correct?
I don't have any objection, Your Honor.
All right. And I'll sign that order. Today is November the 7th. The next order with regard to Ms. Nobles is for all documents, so I'm sure specifically what he means is reports made by agents of the Sheriff's Department regarding Sandra Nobles. What's your position on that, Mr. Irvin?
My position, Your Honor, is that defense counsel hasn't shown any good cause for how these matters might be relevant to the proceedings before this court. My understanding is that the incident involving Mrs. Broderick at the Las Colinas detention facility has not been brought before the court at this time. I'm not sure if it ever will be before this court.
Well, Go ahead.
Excuse me. I think that the materials that are part and parcel of this booking jacket, which is what it's commonly referred to by us, there's some privileged information regarding this inmate. I think furthermore that many of the documents that are inside this booking jacket would be precluded from discovery by 6254 of the government code. And I would ask that this court not grant Mr. Early's order to disclose these materials. Furthermore, I think, and I'm privy to some information, that this inmate may be under some psychiatric care or some medical care. I believe that there are documents relating to that condition in this file. I think they concern confidential patient-client discussions, and I don't think they're appropriate for discovery. I would assert privilege on her behalf as to those materials as well.
That would appear to be appropriate, but what about just the incident reports that are filled out by a deputy sheriff or correctional officer?
As they relate to Sandra Nobles?
Yes.
I can't see any relevance that might have before this court today.
I'm not saying whether or not it has any relevance at this point, but in case the videotape comes in, they may become relevant. And I understand that Mr. Early needs this information in order to investigate any possible defense his client might have to the videotaped incident, should the videotaped incident come into evidence. So I'm not at this point saying that it is relevant or will become relevant in this case, but I think he has a right to information to be in a position to present a defense should it become relevant.
Is the court then instructing that we should make the entire file
No,
available?
I would not want you to release any medical information on her. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's something they need for a defense. Go ahead, Mr. Early.
Your Honor, I think it's appropriate, though, that they submit to the court the file, and that the court can order that if there's something that's private in there, that be ordered sealed and not turned over. But I think, first of all, they wouldn't have the right to do the privilege, but I'm not going to ask for privileged information at this point in time. But I think it's at least appropriate that the file be made available to the court so the court can review it and give over to us the incident reports that would be relevant. And I would honor the court that those reports that are turned over are only to be used for the purpose of investigation, not released to any other person.
And specifically not to any civil attorneys that may be involved in this incident. I'm sure you would not do that, but I'm sure that's what they're interested in also.
Yeah, I'm not going to, what I'm saying is it would be only used for investigation in this case, and I would not be using it to turn it over to anyone else.
Seems like an appropriate compromise, Mr. Irwin. Do you have an objection to that?
I'd submit, Your Honor.
All right, then I won't sign the order turned over to the defense. I'll leave that order unsigned, but with the understanding that Mr. Irwin, your department will turn that file over to me, and I will release only unprivileged material, specifically more than likely just the incident reports. I don't know what else might be in there, but probably would just release the incident reports.
Are we then going to have an in-camera hearing regarding the materials that are in that file, Your Honor? Are you directing us to turn that file over to you and you'll
I think you
return
can
it after
just,
you've reviewed
I
it?
think you can just turn it over to me unless you want to have a hearing and I'll review it. And if I'm going to release anything other than incident reports, I'll notify both counsel so that we can have a hearing. You'll have an opportunity to object.
Very well. Are you going to set a date for us to turn that over?
How soon can you do it?
And in light of the three-day weekend, would Tuesday be appropriate?
Sure, that's all right.
Very well.
Your Honor, I'd just like to state that after we receive the information, that we may be asking for further information and require another hearing with regard to the privileged information.
All right, well, at this point, I can't see where you would be entitled to any psychiatric reports, which I think is going to be the only thing in their privilege, but if you want to have a hearing on that, you can.
Thank you.
The next order that I have in front of me is requesting all the documents and reports regarding an August 23rd, 1991 incident of involving the defendant, Elizabeth Broderick. Do you have any objection to turn over incident reports on that incident, Mr.
My
Irwin?
understanding, Your Honor, these materials have been made available to the DA. We furnished all such documents. I think defense counsel can get those documents from the district attorney.
Your Honor, we attempted to get the documents from the district attorney, and we had a hearing on the matter, and we were referred to Captain Spencer, and then in turn to Mr. Irvin.
Mr. Irvin, apparently the district attorney isn't going to turn them over. Can you turn them over without an order, or do you need an order?
That's fine, Your Honor.
Turn them over without an order?
Yes.
Assume you have no objection to their voluntary compliance then, Mr. Irvin, with that request?
That's fine.
The next order that I have is the work schedules of all sheriff's agents or employees that were involved in the September 1st jail extraction of the defendant. I assume what you mean by work schedules, Mr. Early, is you want to know their current work schedules so you can contact them for possible interviews? Is that the thrust of this order?
No, Your Honor, the thrust of this is to find out the work schedules. Your Honor, we don't have a date that's in this order, but I would ask that their work schedules be for July, August, and September, because these are people that that had contact with Elizabeth Broderick, and part of our defense may involve the reasons that there was a jail extraction at that time of the evening and that time of the day, and the contact that these people have with Elizabeth Broderick.
So you're just interested in whether or not, what days of the week they were working during the months of July, August, September of 1991?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any objection to that, Mr. Irvin?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd object for us to have to go back and now pull 3 months of work schedules for deputies, and I think there are about 7 or 8 deputies that were involved in this incident. I think is burdensome and oppressive. I think that Mr. Early can find out the exact same information by interviewing these people and finding out when they were working and what their duties were on those dates and times. I think for us to now go through and have to go through county resources and contact the auditor to attempt to discover these work schedules. And I'm not sure if we maintain them out at Las Colinas or if they're now furnished to the auditor and the payroll department. But I would submit that I think this is burdensome and it's oppressive for us to now have to go and search out the dates and times that 7 or 8 people worked for a 3-month period.
Mr. Irvin, what's wrong with just talking to these people and asking when they work?
They refuse to talk to us. We've interviewed them, they've refused to talk to us. We've contacted at least 3 of them now, and they've all refused to have an interview with us. And
Does your client contend any one of the 7 or 8 in particular has some axe to grind or whatever? Or?
yes, that was the statement that has been made on a number of occasions, that the timing of this event, the fact that it was done late at night, the fact that it was done on a weekend, when you don't have administrative staff in the sheriff's office, I think shows some pattern that it was done with explicit intent to put Elizabeth Broderick in a bad light. And I think what you have to weigh against it is they say it's my client is facing life without possibility of parole. And we tried the first remedy. It didn't, to talk to the officers themselves, it didn't work. And I think that it's not so oppressive. I can't believe that it's that hard for them to find out work schedules for that period of time. We can make it from July 15th to September 15th.
How about from July 15th to September 1st, which is the date of the incident?
That's fine.
All right, I'll modify this order to show the timesheets, work schedules, etc. for the employees that were involved in the September 1st jail extraction of Mrs. Broderick from July 15th through August. Is that agreeable, Mr. Earl?
Yeah. Well, it'd have to be through September 1st.
All right, through September 1st.
Your Honor, I think maybe it's appropriate just to do it through September 3rd, since that's the end of that weekend, the Labor Day weekend.
All right, September 3rd. All right, I'll sign that order. Next one I have is a request for a list of inmates and the applicable dates of all those housed in A housing at Las Colinas from August 15th through September 20th of 91. What's the relevance of that, Mr. Earl?
Your Honor, again, and I think that can be shortened through August 15th through September 3rd. These would be the potential witnesses to what led up to this incident with Elizabeth Broderick.
You got any idea how many inmates we're talking about? I mean, it's just 10 or 12 or several hundred.
I mean, A housing, there's probably, it may be 20 to 30.
Mr. Urban?
I have no objection.
All right, give you the list. Can you voluntarily provide it, or do you want me to sign the order?
I wish the court to sign the order. Is it going to be limited to the September 3rd date, Your Honor?
No, you said from August 15th through September 3rd.
Right.
Yes. So I'll modify that order to from August 15th through September 3rd. Sign that one. Next one I have is a list of all inmates that were held in the detention cell at Las Colinas from August 15th through September 20th. I assume we can modify that to September 3rd also, Mr. Earl?
Yes, Your Honor.
What's your position on that, Mr. Earl?
Your Honor, and just so that it's clear, the detention cell is I'm talking about is the disciplinary lockup cells. I think there's 2 or 3 of those. It's not meant at the normal booking detention cells where people first come into custody.
All right. Mr. Earl?
Your Honor, I'm opposed to that. I don't think Mr. Early has demonstrated any relevance to discovering why we have other inmates in disciplinary lockup. The fact that we have people in disciplinary lockup or administrative segregation is not relevant to the instances that Ms. Broderick was placed in administrative segregation. The rationale for why we put prisoners there, the length of time, the reasons and rationales for their being there, I don't think it's appropriate for him to have this information. I would ask that the court not grant this order.
I'm not asking, as I understand it, for why they were there, just the names of who was there. Is that
That's all.
the objection, just the names of who were there? Not a question of why they were there or for how long.
I think the fact that these people were there indicates that there was some type of disciplinary action. I don't think it's appropriate for counsel to know. Just based on their names, it's apparent that they have received some discipline and that we were meting out some discipline in the facility. The fact that they are there, I don't think is appropriate for him to discover.
What's your need for this information, Mr. Earl?
Your Honor, there's been allegations as to the condition of the room and things that Mrs. Broderick allegedly did in that room, Your Honor. The district attorney has indicated that they would want this evidence as mental state evidence in her condition and what she does in the jail. I think it's appropriate for us to be able to investigate and find out from witnesses the condition of those cells and how they're normally kept. I've limited it to that period of time, so to a short period of time, so that we're not in the position of saying, well, here's a cell a year later or a year before, but just a condition of those cells at that period of time.
How about just the cell that your client was in? That's really all I can see to be relevant.
Okay, if we have that cell, then, Your Honor, and who just the names of the people in that cell.
Problem with that, Mr. Irvin?
I would still object to the release of that information, Your Honor.
All right, well, I'll order just the release of the names of people that occupied the particular lockdown cell that Ms. Broderick was placed in on September 1st. People that previously occupied that from August 15th
To September 3rd, then, Your
to
Honor?
September 3rd. I'll sign that order. All right, so that order is modified now, reads a list, including the names of inmates and applicable dates of lost cleanest inmates held in the detention cell occupied by Elizabeth Broderick on September 1st, 1991, from August 15th, 91 through September 3rd, 91. Next one that I have is a list of any and all videotapes of inmates that lost cleanest, including the name of the inmate, date of the incident, nature of the incident that were recorded within the past 6 months. What's the need for that, Mr. Early?
Well, Your Honor, there's going to be a question if we're alleging the reason of the incident with Elizabeth Broderick and the videotaping of it was for some other reason than jail discipline. I think that we have the right to look to see what they do videotape and what kind of incidents that it does happen.
Mr. Irvin?
Well, I would oppose this request, Your Honor. I think the fact that we do videotaping in the jail, many times those videotapes become evidence in later criminal proceedings. And I think if there are any videotapes of incidents in the jail, that would be their purpose, as was the purpose of this incident when we videotaped Ms. Broderick and her scuffle. I don't think Mr. Early should be privy to the nature of other incidents involving other inmates. It's not probative of the issues before this court, and I would ask that this request be denied.
Mr. Early, I really don't see the relevance of this, so I'm going to deny this request.
Well, Your Honor, what if they don't have any other videotape incidents?
They may not have, but you can just ask them that. If you want to put on a witness and ask them that.
Well, Your Honor, I think I'm at least entitled to know some discovery to know what witnesses to put on. How would I even know? I mean, what am I supposed to do? Start putting everyone on in the jail?
No, you would call, I would assume you would call the watch commander or call Captain Spencer. You can call somebody to ask if they have videotaped other incidents of inmates in the last 6 months, just yes or no. Maybe Mr. Irvin may be able to tell you that now, I don't know. Do you have that information?
I don't have that information, but I imagine that Captain Spencer could supply it.
Well, then if
If he wishes.
if at least if they can tell Captain Spencer that she has permission to give me that basic information.
I have no problem with her giving you that basic information.
I'd convey that to Captain Spencer.
Next order I have is the names of any and all agents of the Sheriff's Department involved in the September 1st jail extraction. I thought you already had that.
We would, Your Honor, because that would be all incident reports.
Okay,
So that does not need to be signed.
all right. Next is the records, including timesheets, time cards, work schedules of a specific deputy, Deputy Wood, from September of 90 through November 13th of 90, and August and September of 91. What's the purpose of that, Mr. Early?
Your Honor, the purpose of that is that there is, that we have allegations of incidences that arose for the first time just before the trial of the first trial that involved Elizabeth Broderick. And then now we have incidents that arise just before the second trial of Elizabeth Broderick. Some of those involved this deputy. So we think that, at least at that point in time, I think we're entitled to show a pattern of that these are the things that happened just at the time of trial. Obviously, and Deputy Woods just happens to be a witness from cross-examination in this case as to statements and other things of the last trial.
What is the significance of whether or not she was working September 28th through November 13th? I don't think there'll be any contention she wasn't.
There may be, I don't know. I mean, she may relate instances where she wasn't working. She may, there may be, I just don't know what, obviously at this time, there's another witnesses that refused to talk to us. And so I cannot go to her and have an interview with her and say, there's been a number of instances that you've either been a witness or you have been involved with. And what was your work schedule? When were you working during that period of time? I can't do that since she won't talk to us.
Mr. Irvin, you got,
Well, Your Honor, she's already been a witness in this proceeding. It seems
she hasn't been.
She has not?
No.
Well, I think that Mr. Early could call her as a witness and find out this information.
Well, I'm not gonna let him call her as a witness to ask her when she worked.
Well, I don't think it's appropriate that we now attempt to go through and find out when this deputy worked, what her duties were for this period.
Can you just ask if some appropriate sergeant or lieutenant or captain in your organization just ask her when she worked during that time frame and turn that information over to Mr. Early rather than get the time cards?
Well, Your Honor, first of all, maybe we ought to find out, maybe the time cards are just kept in one place and they're easy to get and it's not burdensome. I mean, we've been thrown up here to say, maybe it might be very burdensome. I would expect that in almost any county agency that I've been involved in has a person that's a payroll person that keeps records in one place. I understand he says maybe in this world they might be in 50 different places, but they may be in one place and it may not be burdensome. It may be very easy to do that. So I think first we ought to have at least some inquiry. Are they readily available? And if they are readily available, then I don't think the court should say, well, maybe it's burdensome, so I won't say. I think that they have at least some duty to say, well, here's the records are in 4 different places, 5 different places. It would take us 20 hours to get them. If the records are all in one place.
Mr. Irvin, do you know whether?
I don't have a problem, Your Honor, supplying information as to when this deputy is and was working. I do have a problem with supplying the exact time she was working, when she was taking her lunch, when she was taking her break, what her duties were at Las Colinas. I don't think that's appropriate that Mr. Early find those matters out. It goes part and parcel with how we conduct our operations in the jail.
It seems reasonable. Mr. Early can provide you what days she was working. Isn't that good enough?
Well, I think that at least knowing what shifts she was working and times that you get there and times to get back. Again, this is not material that's going to be released to anyone else. I can't believe that there is anything that is someone's going to discover a secret about the sheriff's operation from a deputy and the time schedules that they worked.
I'll order turned over the days she was working and the time and the shift she was working. If the shift information is readily available, if it's not readily available, you're free to come back and I'll address the order again. Is that agreeable, Mr. Irvin?
That'd be fine, Your Honor.
So turn over the All right, so any and all records of the days and shift worked by Deputy Wood from September 28th, 90 through November 13th, 90, and for the month of August and September of 91.
That's right. And I believe that it probably can be from August 1st, from the instance I'm aware of at 91 through September 3rd.
All right, then I'll further modify it. All right, so I'll sign that order as modified. Last one I have is a request for copies of all written correspondence from Mrs. Broderick to Sheriff Jim Roach. Any problem with that, Mr. Irvin?
Well, Your Honor, is this the order that indicates order for jury lists?
No.
Okay, I don't
have any such order for
have
jury
a
list.
copy with this information. It says order for jury list.
I don't have any such.
There was a typographical error on that, and the heading should be different.
The only order I have left is the one that says to release copies of any and all letters written by Elizabeth Ann Broderick and addressed to Sheriff Jim Rhodes.
Well,
That's
Your Honor,
correct, Your Honor, but I think what he's referring to is in the caption, it says order for jury lists, and that should have been changed to order for discovery request. So it's a typographical error in that regard.
I don't know what the relevance of this is, Your Honor, but I can tell the court that I've spoken with Sheriff Roach this morning. He has received several letters from Ms. Broderick. I don't know what the status of those letters are at this point, nor where they would be found. Aside from the relevance issue, we would comply with this to the extent that those letters their location can be ascertained at this time.
Satisfactory, Mr. Early?
Yes, and and I would just like to know if they can't be found, that at least we've informed of the fact that there are letters that exist, they can't be found, and where their last location that was done.
Their last location was on Sheriff Roach's desk.
All right, then I won't bother signing that. You can find them, turn them over. That's the 10 that I had. That's it as to this issue?
That's the issue.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're in recess. Mr. Burkhoff, Mr. Sherman, let's do your matter before I bring the jury in. Matter of the people of the state of California versus Larry James Evans.
Yes, Your Honor. Sheldon Sherman on behalf of Mr. Evans. Your Honor, just for the record, I'll be straight in this matter. Last Wednesday, with Mr. Lamborn's permission, I did see the court in chambers to indicate that due to Mr. Evans being informed that his wife is contemplating moving to New York State next year, and given the circumstances that the court is aware of his inability to see his children for a great deal of time.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The matter of the people of the state of California versus Elizabeth Ann Broderick. Court finds all members of the jury panel are present. Mr. Early is present. Ms. Broderick is present. Mr. Burkhoff is present. Ms. Wells is not present. She caught whatever you folks had. She called. I talked to her at approximately 8:30 this morning from her house. She informed me she had been up all night. She has the flu. She is uncertain as to whether she would be able to be here tomorrow. We're looking at a 3-day weekend, Monday being a holiday, as I'm sure you are aware. If not, I'll let you know Monday is a holiday. So after discussing the matter with counsel that are present, it was our intention to recess until Tuesday morning at 9. Counsel and I have also discussed the scheduling of this case, and they both agree, and I agree, that we are still ahead of schedule. This will not place us behind schedule. We will still be okay. However, this is obviously going to throw a monkey wrench a little bit into witness scheduling next week. The way things work, when you have out-of-town witnesses, you have to buy airline tickets in advance to get the best price, as you're probably aware. The defense has some out-of-town witnesses coming that obviously we're not going to get to when we thought we were going to get to them. They're going to have to be rescheduled, and we will do our best to get them here in an orderly fashion so that we won't have any interruptions next week. But it is possible that we may have some interruptions due to circumstances that are beyond anyone's control. Some of these witnesses have private practices and have to reschedule other appointments that they have. And so it becomes more than just buying them a new airline ticket. We will do our best to proceed in an orderly fashion next week, but I think it's fair to let you know what's going on because I don't like jurors having to guess what we're doing, and it's usually what happens if you guess what we're doing. You think we're doing something secret we don't want you to know about, and that's not the case. So with that, Mr. Burkhoff, it is the people's request that we be dark until Tuesday. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And the defense joins in that, Mr. Early?
Yes, Your Honor.
And Mrs. Broderick, you have no objection to that? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be in recess until Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Please remember the admonition, and please remember also not to watch 2020 this week. I understand it's going to be on Friday. You can see how much television I watch. I didn't know which day it was, but I understand it's on Friday night. So please be careful not to watch that particular show. And please remember the admonition over this holiday weekend not to discuss the case among yourselves, nor let anyone else discuss it with you, nor form any opinions till it's finally submitted to you. We'll see you Tuesday at 9 o'clock, and I apologize to each and every one of you on behalf of both counsel for your having to get up and come down here this morning. But we just didn't learn about this expeditiously enough to get a hold of you at home. And as you know from past experience, if we can get a hold of you at home, we do try to do that. Have a nice weekend. We're in recess. President, you're still under oath from last week, ma'am. You may proceed, Ms. Wells.
Thank you, Your Honor. When we had finished up last week, I had asked you to identify a letter that was sent to you by Mr. Broderick in which he explained to you after the court-ordered support how to take care of your health insurance and your auto insurance and your life insurance. And you didn't want to identify that letter without seeing the first page. Your Honor, may I have marked as People's Exhibit 74, a letter dated December 31st, 1986, to Elizabeth Ann Broderick.
So marked.
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Certainly.
If you could take a look at this complete letter and tell us, is that the letter that you received from Mr. Broderick describing for you how to take care of those things?
I don't remember receiving this. I just don't remember receiving it.
Attached to the letter are some checks that he sent to you as part of your support. Is that not correct?
That's what it looks like.
Okay, and on the back side of those checks is your signature endorsing the checks when you deposited them into your account. Is that not correct?
Right. I would have gotten the checks and I probably got the letter, but I may have gotten it through Bill Hargreaves.
But you
In
did
which
get the
case I
letter.
wouldn't have read it.
You would have just accepted the checks, but you wouldn't have read the letter.
Right.
Okay, but you did get a letter anyway in which Mr. Broderick explained to you how to take care of your health insurance, how to take care of your homeowner's insurance,
Your Honor,
how to take
objection.
care of your auto
As soon as
insurance.
facts not evidence has been asked.
Sustained, unasked, and answered.
Did it not, you also indicated, you testified that you were never explained that your support was taxable to you, correct? That you were going to have to pay taxes on that.
I still don't know if that's true.
Does it not explain in this letter?
Your Honor, I have an objection. There's been testimony that's been asked and answered about the letter.
Well,
I believe I can,
she can see if she can refresh her recollection to see if she remembers that part of the letter. She's testified that she thinks she got the letter, might have got it from Broderick. She doesn't remember reading it.
Yes, Your Honor. So all those questions is irrelevant as to reading the letter and then asking her if this is true.
Overall, she's asking if that's in the letter, if that refreshes your recollection. Take a look at it and let her know. So,
What's the question?
does it refresh your recollection to look at the last paragraph on that page, page 2, and the first paragraph on page 3, wherein it was explained to you that your support payments were taxable to you, and that you should contact an accountant if you had any
Your
questions
Honor,
about that?
I have an objection. This is improper.
sustained. Just have her read it to herself and see if she refreshes her recollection.
I don't remember getting this letter, so I don't remember that paragraph.
Obviously, it is fair to say, Mrs. Broderick, that if you received the support payment inside the letter and you deposited that payment, that you received the letter. Is that not true?
I don't know if that's true. I could have gotten it through Mr. Hargreaves at that time. See the date?
Well, explain to me how you're saying you got the letter through Mr. Hargreaves. How does that make a difference about whether or not you received it?
I wouldn't have read it.
Objection.
I didn't
It's
read it.
argumentative. She's already answered. She doesn't remember the letter.
Sustained.
I'm simply asking if you can, I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm asking if you can explain how you would have gotten this letter with the support included and not have read it.
Your Honor,
That's
objection.
easy. I didn't read it
Argumentative
this time.
false
Sustained. She just, Ms. Wells, I don't know if she read it.
Just so that it's clear, what you're saying is you received the letter
I don't even know if I received it. It may have gone to Bill Hargreaves' office. I may have gone down and picked up the checks from Bill Hargreaves. And if he gave it to me, I didn't read it.
Is it addressed to Elizabeth Ann Broderick at 8320 Calle de Cielo?
Yes, but at this time,
Your Honor, I'm just going to object. It's
That's
arguable.
overruled, that's proper.
You also indicated that right after the court ordered support in January of 1987, when Tricia Smith took over the case, that Dan Broderick was immediately playing games with you, that he wasn't paying his support, and that he was waiting until the end of the month to pay the support, correct?
that's my recollection the first month. And then we had to rewrite the court order.
Your Honor, may I have marked as People's Exhibit 75, a series of 12 statements written by Dan Broderick, addressed to Elizabeth Broderick,
So marked.
with checks attached to each one. If you would take a look at this first letter dated January the 30th. Is that not a letter that was sent to you by Dan Broderick about your support, including your support check?
That's what it looks like, yes.
And it's dated January 30th.
Right.
And it indicates the amount of support the balance of the amount of support that he was due to you that month, correct?
Right.
And attached to that is a check totaling that amount.
You mean three or four checks totaling?
Totaling the amount
That he's
of the
supposed to get,
balance that
right.
was due to you.
Right.
And you deposited those checks in your account, did you not?
I remember probably.
If you would look at the attached deposit slip where you deposited those checks in your account, can you tell us the date that you deposited those checks in your account?
February 2nd.
So you received this letter, or it was mailed to you on January 30th, and you deposited on February 2nd, 1987,
Right.
correct? If you would take a look at the next letter that's dated March 4th, 1987, is that not also a statement from Dan Broderick regarding your support that he paid to you on March 4th, 1987?
Yes. But where's the February check? See, something's wrong here.
Excuse me, Mrs. Broderick. The first statement, this represents court-ordered support for the month of February 1987. It was sent January 30th. It was deposited February 2nd. On March 4th, the check was sent to you. There's a deposit slip attached. Can you tell us what the date is of your deposit?
March 6th.
On April 2nd, 1987, a letter sent to you. Is this not a letter sent to you regarding the amount due for the month of April 1987?
Yes.
And attached is the check that you endorsed and the deposit slip. What's the date of the deposit?
April 3rd.
It was sent April 2nd, it was deposited April 3rd, correct?
Right.
On May 1st, did you not receive a letter for the month of May with the support that was due to you that month, a statement of the support that was due?
There was only 1 month where we had this problem.
Well, excuse me, I don't believe that was your testimony, but let me just go through this. When you deposited that amount, what's the date of the deposit?
May 4th. There was only 1 month, and Tricia Smith had to rewrite the court order, and then he complied to the new court order. My complaint was we had to rewrite the court order because there was a loophole that did not say that it was due and payable on the first of the month.
Did you not, Mrs. Broderick, testify that he was playing games with you and not paying his support all during 1987, and he was making you wait and wait until the end of the month?
No, that was 1 month in the beginning because of this loophole, and Tricia Smith had to rewrite the court order, and she was very bothered about that.
Well, let's just go through the rest of these, just so that we
It's a waste of time.
It's irrelevant.
Overruled. Go ahead.
On June 2nd, did he not send you?
Your Honor, I'm being distracted horribly, and there was an order about cameras without.
Yeah, could you pull down the noise? Go ahead.
Is there not a statement for the month of June 1987, including a check for the support that he owed you?
Right.
And when did you deposit that check?
June 4th.
It was sent on June 2nd and you deposited it June 4th, is that correct?
It says.
Statement for July 2nd, including an accounting and the checks that were due to you for support, were deposited on July 8th by you, is that correct?
Right.
A statement sent to you on July 31st for the month of August of 1987, with a check written by Dan Broderick and deposited by you on what day?
Could you reread my testimony, because I testified to this correctly, and you're trying to say that I was lying, and I wasn't lying.
You can't ask her questions, Mrs. Broderick.
Okay, what's the question?
My only question of you is when was that August
August 4th.
support check deposited by you in your account?
August 4th.
Statement dated September 4th for the month of September with a check included. When was that deposited by you?
September 8th.
Statement dated October 2nd, 1987 with a check, the balance for you. When was that deposited?
October 5th.
Statement dated November 2nd, 1987 with the check included. When was that deposited for you?
11/4.
Statement dated December 2nd, 1987 with the check included. And when was that deposited?
12/7.
Your Honor, I would like the record to reflect that the total amount of payments in these checks, including the payment on her mortgage on the Calle de Cielo house, was $190,000, $926.
I'm going to object until we start bringing in the
Well,
income of.
excuse me, it's best evidence the documents speak for themselves.
Is it not true, Mrs. Broderick, that in the year of 1987, after the court ordered support of $16,000, that Dan Broderick paid every cent that he was ordered by the court to pay, and he paid it in the first week of every month of that year?
It's not my recollection in the beginning. In that first month, he played with us somehow, and I had to have the court order redone because of this little loophole. That's my recollection. But he was court ordered to pay that money, so he had no choice, but he filed an appeal because he didn't want to pay it.
Is it not true, Mrs. Broderick, that he paid every cent that he was ordered to pay by the court, and he paid it in the first week, and you deposited it in the first week of every month?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe it's December of.
Are you challenging these deposit slips?
I have the diaries. If I can consult the diary, I'll tell you what happened there, because that's where I remember it. It's in the diaries. And it's from Tricia Smith, I remember that she had to rewrite a court order that it was due and payable on the first of the month.
I'm going to offer those in evidence, Your Honor, at this point.
What do you want to offer them at this point?
I just want to offer them in evidence.
Any objection?
Your Honor, in front of the jury, we're going to play games. I also, at this point, want to offer,
Your Honor,
I
this is
also-
ridiculous.
Just a minute.
and I want to offer these.
Mr.
Your Honor.
Early,
Let's set them marked,
just a
and let's
minute,
play
Mr.
these games now.
Mr.
Let's
Early,
get the diaries marked so the jury can hear the whole truth.
Mr. Early, knock it off. Just calm down for a minute. You object to People 74. or
At this point in
75.
time, Your Honor, until everything can be heard, I object.
All right, objection sustained. That's all I asked you. No speeches. Go ahead.
Well, Your Honor, I would ask that you would give the same admonition to the district attorney.
All she did was offer one exhibit, Mr. Early.
We had discussed that that would be done at the end of the case, Your Honor, not.
I asked you if you objected. All I wanted to know was your position. You stated it. I've ruled. Go ahead, Ms. Wells.
When you talked last week, Mrs. Broderick, about the instances of physical contact that you had with Miss Broderick, excuse me, the black eye that you described, the skiing, was that something that you were still angry about on November the 5th, 1989?
No.
Was that something that had anything to do with what you did on November the 5th, 1989?
I mean, those specific things, no.
Okay. Did they have anything to do with your state of mind that morning? Were you thinking about what he had done to you back during that skiing incident? Did that have anything to do with your state of mind that morning?
Not in particular and specifically, but in general, I thought he was a monster on that morning. So all of those sorts of things contributed to it.
And is that why you killed him on that morning, because you thought he was a monster?
No.
It is true, and you've testified, I believe already, that at the time of the separation in 1985 and 1986, even up through 1987, that you would have willingly and happily stayed married to him if you'd had the opportunity to, correct?
In 86 and 87?
Let's just stay with 1985 when the separation occurred.
Absolutely, yes.
And you have indicated to reporters, for example, that you definitely wanted to have him as your husband and you wanted to have him as your children's father.
I wanted to keep our family intact, yes.
I asked you about a trip prior to separation about whether or not you had taken a cruise to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And you indicated no. It was a cruise to Bermuda that you took, correct?
Several years before separation, yes.
Okay. So there was a cruise to Bermuda in 1981 or 1982,
Yes.
and the trip to Cancun, as well as the 3 trips to Europe.
Right.
Now, it is true in 1985, after the separation, when Dan Broderick moved back into the Coral Reef house, that you did vandalize the Coral Reef house.
Yes.
And there was a series of vandalisms that occurred over there. For example, in June of 1985, you smashed the telephone answering machine, you broke a large mirrored closet door, you smashed a hole in the bedroom wall, you spray painted the walls of the bedroom and the bathroom, the walls of the family room, the curtains in the family room, the brick fireplace with black Rust-Oleum paint, correct?
No, those have never been correct, and those are the things I corrected in the file in 1985 or 6.
Well, you did spray paint the house. You've already admitted that you spray painted the house.
I remember ruining some wallpaper, but as far as those other things, nobody ever did those things. Those things never happened.
Well, when you say you remember ruining some wallpaper, how was it that you ruined the wallpaper?
With the spray paint.
So
I
you
hated the
spray-
wallpaper that he put up.
Okay, and so you went to the house and you spray painted the wallpaper.
I ruined the wallpaper, right?
And what words did you write with your spray paint?
No words.
In October, you took the Boston cream pie and you smeared it all over the bedspread, the carpet, the mirror in the bathroom, 10 or 12 sweaters and shirts.
No, see, that's Dan's exaggeration again. I've already described it was a little tiny cake. It couldn't possibly have been, done that much damage. It's no way.
And your testimony is that you just smushed it on his bed
Yes,
and that no one in the house was upset by your conduct at the time?
I didn't remember that. I heard some babysitter say that Lee was upset, but I've spoken to Lee since, and she said she wasn't upset at all. She thought it was funny.
On October 19th, 1985, you threw 2 bottles of wine through a large window. You shattered a sliding glass door up into the television set, broke the cover on the stereo, smashed 2 lamps.
I threw the bottles through the window on that Saturday morning when Dan took Rhett away, but that's all I did. The rest of the stuff is lies, always has been.
On November the 3rd, you broke a large picture window with an umbrella.
No,
You didn't break that with the umbrella?
there's no other broken window. There was only the one with the champagne bottle.
Well, you didn't recall breaking the window at the Coral Reef house either when you went over there to burn the carpet until you were shown the photographs, correct?
No, I didn't.
And when you were shown the photographs that you had broken the window, then you remembered that you had broken it,
No,
right?
I don't really remember being there, no.
So you still don't remember the fact that you broke the sliding glass door at Coral Reef when you went over there that day?
No, but I'll believe I did it.
So it is true that there are some things that you've done in the past that were vandalism that you don't recall.
If you're saying those things are things I did that I don't recall, those are not things that anybody did. Those are the personal injury attorney's way of expounding on minor things.
On December 19th, 1985, you entered the Coral Reef house and tore the wrapping paper off of Christmas presents that had been purchased for the children. You shattered a mirror hanging in the hallway. You slammed the front door with such force that it punched a hole in the wall.
Lies.
You've already admitted that you did rip the wrappers off the Christmas presents.
But all that other stuff is just lies.
Okay, so you went in and you ripped the presents off of
I don't really,
ripped the wrapping off of the Christmas presents, but the rest of it is not true.
I don't really remember doing that either. I mean, I don't really remember that, but I know that those big violent things that he's claiming nobody ever did. Those things never happened. There were not holes in walls and doors off hinges and things. Nobody
Do you
did those
remember
things.
ripping the wrappers off the presents?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Do you remember testifying the last time when you testified that you remember doing that?
I could have done that. I mean, that's not
So you could have
something
done a
real
lot of these
violent.
things, but you're not remembering them now.
I could have, but I don't think I did.
It is true that Mr. Broderick asked you on many occasions during that period of time to please stop vandalizing the house, that it was upsetting the children. He did ask you many times to please stop, didn't he?
Well, I don't remember him talking to me. I was mad because he had Linda in the house with the kids.
Do you recall last time testifying that you remembered that he asked you verbally many times
No,
to stop, and your
I'm
response
sure
was?
he did. I'm sure he did, but I don't remember him asking. I don't remember him talking to me during that time, which is part of the problem.
Didn't you say last time when you testified, when you were asked, didn't he ask you, please, many times to stop the vandalism? Didn't you say yes, but he wouldn't stop having Linda Colquina over?
That's probably what I said, right?
So as far as you were concerned, if he had Linda Colquina over, it was okay for you to do the vandalism.
That was my house, and he was lying about Linda during those times when most of these things happened. He was still lying. In December, he wasn't lying anymore, but I didn't like Linda. I was mad about all the lies and everything.
I think that's a given, and you therefore felt that you could vandalize the house, correct?
Well, it didn't follow like that.
Didn't he, then when you wouldn't stop after he'd asked you verbally, didn't he write you a letter and ask you please to stop the vandalism because of what it was doing to the children?
I don't know, maybe.
May I have marked, Your Honor, as People's Exhibit 75?
76.
A letter dated November the 4th, 1985.
So mark.
If you could read the last paragraph on the first page to yourself, please, to see if that refreshes your recollection about whether or not he'd asked you on many occasions to stop.
Now, what's the question?
Does that refresh your recollection?
I'm not done with it yet.
Excuse me, Mrs. Broderick, I asked you to read the last paragraph to see if that refreshes your recollection about whether or not he had asked you on many occasions to please stop the vandalism because of what it was doing to the children.
It doesn't say that there.
I'm asking you if that refreshes your recollection at all about whether or not he asked you that. It's yes or no.
That doesn't say anything like that. You must be in the wrong paragraph or something.
I certainly don't mind if you come over to pick
Your
up
Honor,
the kids
I
or some of your
don't-
possessions.
Sustained.
The children?
Stan, just,
Did he not? Does this, I guess you haven't answered my question yet. Does it refresh your recollection at all about whether or not he asked you to stop the vandalism?
It refreshes my recollection about a lot of things, about threats.
Ma'am, can you
About
please?
court
Mrs.
order.
Broderick, just
No.
answer her question, yes or
No.
no. The answer is no, that's fine.
Does he not ask you to please keep the animosity to a minimum? That you're making it very difficult?
Is that in the last paragraph that you asked me? No, it's not, is it? No, it's not. Please say that it's not, right? You're wrong.
I would really like to keep the stress and animosity to a
Just a
minimum.
minute, just a minute.
She's,
Well, she's asked a legitimate question, Ms. Walls. I don't know if it's in the last paragraph or not. She's saying it's not.
Okay. Does it say in the last paragraph, I would really like to keep the stress and animosity to a minimum, but you are making that very difficult?
Yes, but it doesn't say anything about the children.
May I have another letter marked, Your Honor, as People's Exhibit 77, dated July 21st, 1986?
So marked.
Why don't you read this one-page letter, Mrs. Broderick, and see if that refreshes your recollection about whether or not he requested that you stop the vandalism or the bad mouthing because of what it was doing to the children.
So what's the question?
Does that refresh your recollection about whether or not he had made requests to you to please stop bad mouthing him, saying, putting the kids in the middle of the divorce?
This is after the bifurcation. He says that. It's kind of pathetic, but yes.
Bad mouthing one another to the kids, or even worse, blaming them for the divorce, is destructive. I suggest that each of us encourage the kids to love and respect the other.
This is improper.
Sustained.
I'm asking her, I want to ask her what she thinks is so pathetic about this, Judge. She just said it was pathetic.
Well, then
That he
ask
sent the
them.
children out of town for the summer and he went in and got the forcible sole custody, no visitation, and a final divorce without any attempt on his part at all to settle any issues. And then he sends me a letter like I should be careful about what's happening to the children.
When he sent the children, bring it back up, when he sent the children to camp, of course, going to camp was something that they did every summer,
They
right?
weren't at camp on July 16th, 86. They were in Ohio at his parents'.
They'd gone to visit his parents and then they went to camp. And that wasn't anything that was particularly unusual. They went to camp every summer, didn't they?
Not particularly every summer,
Well,
no.
they'd gone to camp for several summers in a row.
Some of them had, yes, some of them
Okay.
had.
And at this time, you had been doing vandalism, you had been using the bad words. There was a recommendation by the psychologist that maybe it would be helpful for these kids to get them out of town for a while because of all of the animosity that you were expressing. Isn't that true?
I wouldn't know that.
I'm going to object as soon as that's not happening.
Sustained.
You didn't have any discussions at all with Mr. Broderick about whether it wouldn't be a good idea to get the kids out of the middle of this for a while,
Mr. Broderick would not discuss anything with me.
okay?
The children
Excuse
told me things. The children told me that he was sending them out of town because he was going into court that was going to do something that was going to enrage your mother. So he wanted to hide them, and they
Okay,
didn't
we'll-
want to
we'll-
go.
We'll talk about the bifurcation in a minute. When you would not stop the vandalism or stop using the bad words, which you admitted you didn't stop, he did attempt to, well, first to serve you with a restraining order and then ultimately to serve you with an order of contempt, correct?
What year are you in, please?
1986. In January of 1986, did he not attempt to serve you with some process regarding a contempt hearing, and you called him up and told him that he better get the process server out of there or you were going to kill him, kill the kids, and burn the houses down?
I don't remember saying I was going to kill him and kill the kids. That's, again, Dan's words and Dan's letter. But I was absolutely hysterical that there were more papers coming to my front door. I had felt barraged, and I
In January of 1986, how many papers had you received?
don't know, but I was hysterical. And I said, you get the dogs away from my front door. You're crazy. Get these people away from me. I was scared to death.
Well, January of 1986, 1985, we'll look at your own exhibits here. First of all, the first part of the year 1985, you hadn't received any papers, right?
There's nothing filed until October.
In September of, in the second half of 1985, you were served with the dissolution papers. You were served with a restraining order. and you were served with an OSC rate contempt. Those are the only things that you were served with. Is that the barrage of papers that you're talking about?
Well, I was also served with all of these threatening letters from Dan Broderick. So to me, they were kind of the same thing.
Okay, well, let's get back to whether or not this is a threatening letter then. Dear Elizabeth Ann, you and I are no longer married. It is now up to us to do our best to minimize the trauma. I want to.
Well, she wants to ask her if what in there she considered a threat. I assume that's where you're going.
That's correct, Your Honor. It's only 2 paragraphs.
Well, I believe that she has a right to show it to her and ask what's threatening.
Go ahead. Show it to her and ask her. Has she seen that one?
Yes.
Which one are you holding up just for me?
People 77.
Go ahead.
It is now up to us to do our best to minimize the trauma our divorce will have on our kids and see that they are as happy and secure, see that they have as happy and secure a childhood as possible under the circumstances. Is there a threat in that paragraph to
The
you?
very first sentence just drove me absolutely crazy. You and I are no longer married. That's what he kept saying. We're finally, completely, absolutely, totally divorced. He never wanted to see or hear or speak to me again. And then he goes on to say in his platitudes that we ought to make it easy and nice for the kids now. And I'm going, what are you doing? I mean, it's the bifurcation. It's years into this thing. And I've gotten absolutely no satisfaction out of him in any regard. The children, the phone, the money, anything. And he sends me that typical cold-hearted lawyer letter. We are no longer married. Now let's make sure the kids are having fun.
Well, this was July of 1986. It
After
was
the
true
bifurcation.
that it had been over a year since you've been separated. And
Well
it
over
was
a year.
true that you were no longer married. Correct?
Yes, thanks to his handling of the situation, yes, that is technically true.
Well, it is true. He filed for a divorce.
That's right.
He wanted the divorce,
That's right.
and you were divorced.
That's right.
And what is the threat that's in that first paragraph?
The first-
Sustained.
Bad-mouthing one another to the kids, or even worse, blaming them for the divorce is destructive. I suggest that each of us encourage the kids to love and respect the other, and that we refrain from any derogatory comments to or about one another. What is the threat that's in there?
That he is making, do you see anything in there that he wants to come to a conclusion about the children or the money or anything with me? No. He is in total control of everything. And that is a letter to me saying that it's now my responsibility to make sure that the children don't hear naughty names from me and that the children are happy about this. And
Okay,
putting all
and
that
you just-
responsibility on me at that point.
Okay.
I would have expected a letter at that point of, we're finally divorced, let's make some sort of a settlement, let's get on with our lives. That's what I wanted in a
And
letter
you
at
don't
that
think
point.
that's what he was saying in this?
I know that's not what he said.
It would have
no.
been better for him to say, we are finally divorced, instead of you and I are no longer married? Is there a difference
No,
in that?
that letter doesn't say, let's make an attempt to settle this at all. It doesn't mention that at all. It just says,
Henceforth, I will do anything I can on this score for the kids' sake, and I hope you will do the same. He's talking about the kids, not the divorce, the kids, right?
what does that mean? Henceforth, he will do anything. He wouldn't speak to me. He wouldn't let me see them. He wouldn't let me talk on the phone to him.
Are you
Henceforth,
saying in
I will
July
do
of
anything. He wouldn't
1986?
do anything.
Are you saying in July of 1986 you weren't seeing the kids?
I always saw the kids. He'd have
Okay.
to kill me to keep me away from those kids.
Back to when the Knox Attorney Service tried to serve you with an order. You wouldn't receive the order, you wouldn't open up the door, you did call up Dan Broderick, you threatened him, you told him to get them
Get the dogs
away, or
off,
that
right.
you'd kill the kids, kill him, burn the houses down, correct?
That's what he says. I said, I know I was scared to death and absolutely hysterical, and I wanted him to call off the dogs.
Well, you have threatened before to kill Dan and the kids.
I've never threatened to kill the kids. I know he says that, but I've never threatened ever to kill the kids.
Do you remember when you were at Claremont Hospital after driving the car through the door? Patient readily admits that she had threatened to kill her husband, children, and self in the past. Did you readily admit that you had done that at Claremont Hospital?
I said I probably, have said things like that, but when particularly asked, I've never threatened the children at all, ever.
Well, when you say I would have probably said that,
Well,
but
I
when
almost agreed to it when you
particularly
just said it. I said a lot of things when I was mad and stuff, not meaning any of them.
asked-
But
Okay,
I don't
So-
think I ever threatened the children.
And you were mad when the Knox Attorney Service was attempting to serve you with a contempt order. And so it is possible that you told Dan that you were going to kill the kids, you were going to kill him, you were going to burn the house down.
I was not mad. I was terrified. I was scared. I was alone. I had no way to defend myself against him. I was not mad. I was scared.
This was a process server who was knocking on the door to serve you with a piece of paper.
Right.
Okay. And Dan Broderick did call the process server up, didn't he? He called him, he got in touch with him, and he told him not to do it.
Yes, he did.
And the vandalism continued. The restraining order didn't work. The asking you not to do it didn't work. The attempting to serve you
Where are
with
you
a
now?
contempt
Where
order
are you?
after January of 1986. In February of 1986, that's when you went over and drove the car through the front door, correct?
Okay.
And that's when you tried to go over to Coral Reef and burn the house down and smash the sliding glass door, correct?
I'm
In February of 86?
Totally confused. But that letter was just July of 86. So now we're going backwards?
When the Knox Attorney Service attempted to serve you, it was January of 1986.
Okay. So from there, okay.
And he wasn't able to serve you with any papers. He wasn't able to serve you with any attempted contempt action to go to court, and the vandalism did continue. Yes.
Is now the knocking into his door what you're referring to as the vandalism?
Yes.
Well, I don't consider that vandalism.
Okay.
And that's a different house, and they had moved. And no, the vandalism as such in Coral Reef did not continue. They moved out.
They're now in Cyprus, and the
Yes.
driving through to the front door was at Cyprus, correct?
Yes.
And in January of 1986, when we were talking about, they were already in Cyprus, living in Cyprus.
I think so. Sometime in January 86.
And you did continue, or you began at that point, leaving the messages on his machine. That's when he put the message machine, answering machine at his house, correct?
Probably.
It was, again, that summer that you complained that Dan sent the children to camp, correct?
You're doing a great job of reminding me about all of this stuff. Because I was absolutely, as we get it in order and it all comes back the way it was, yeah, he moved to Cyprus. And yeah, he put the telephone machine on so I couldn't reach my kids. And yeah, he had the restraining order. But he wasn't doing anything to make peace or get an agreement or to see that I saw the kids at all.
Okay.
So, you're trying to.
Excuse me, Mrs. Broderick, thank you. You've answered the question. Well, perhaps it'd be appropriate to take a break, Your Honor, so the witness can compose herself.
Do you want a break, Ms. Broderick?
No, I'm fine.
Please help you. Ms. Broderick?
I have something,
Okay,
thank you.
okay. She just says she doesn't need a break. Go ahead.
It was after you drove the car through the front door when Kim and Lee were home, and it was after you began leaving the messages on the answering machine in 1986 when the psychologist again recommended that the children perhaps would be better off if they got out of town, correct?
How would I know any of that? No psychologist ever spoke to me.
Are you saying Dr. Sparta never spoke to you?
Not that I can
I have
recall.
an objection as to the form of the question.
Sustained. Let's rephrase it.
You never had any conversations with Dr. Sparta about the children?
I called him a few times to meet with him and talk with him, but I don't remember that no, I never met him. I never saw him.
Okay.
And we may have had a conversation on the phone that I initiated because I wanted to talk to him, but I don't remember that he recommended those sorts of things to me.
Isn't it true that Dr. Sparta specifically called you because he wanted to get your input, he wanted to get your help with doing something for these kids, and you refused.
I don't remember that, no, because it was my feeling that I wanted to get involved with Dan and with the children in therapy, always.
Do you recall Dr. Jacobson trying to get you and Dan involved with therapy with the kids and you refusing?
Dr. Jacobson definitely tried to get Dan involved in therapy years before, and Dan would not come in.
I'm talking about in 1985.
No, I wouldn't have refused that. I mean, I don't remember that he recommended that. I don't remember that he ever called Dan. I don't remember that ever happening.
And you're saying that you don't remember Dr. Sparta ever calling you and trying to get you involved, and all you wanted to do with Dr. Sparta was tell him how awful you thought Dan Broderick was.
I don't remember him ever offering me to come speak to him. I wanted to come speak to him, but I was very wary of Dan's expert witnesses being hired for the adversarial legal system and not for straight out innocuous therapy.
And that's what you're saying he did with Dr. Sparta when he hired Dr. Sparta before the divorce? And he was hiring him to be an adverse witness?
Yes, because he was referred to Dr. Sparta by his divorce attorney, and that's the way divorce attorneys work.
To get help for the kids?
No.
Okay, well, if you never talked to Dr. Sparta, how do you know what he was hired for and what he was trying to do on behalf of your children?
Because I've been in the system long enough to know how it works now, that lawyers have particular psychologists and experts that they hire when they want that expert to say a certain thing. Dan had sole custody of the kids. He wanted to keep sole custody of the kids, and Dr. Sparta was hired to make sure that that happened.
In 1985, Dan had sole custody of the kids because you had given him custody of the kids. He had taken the kids to Dr. Sparta to get help.
I never gave Dan sole custody of the children. I put the children, as we've testified, back at Coral Reef when Dan took the rental roof away from us and told us we'd have no home. The children went back to Coral Reef. Then he sent them away for the summer. And then when they came back from the summer is when the real trouble started, where he had restraining orders to keep me away from the kids in the house. I never gave Dan custody of the children, but I didn't have a house or monthly income to take them with me, ever. And after what Dan did in February of '85, cutting us off without a house or any income, I didn't think he wouldn't do it again. I thought he would do it again.
It wasn't until September, October, November of '86, after living through this of 18 months worth of the vandalism, of the obscene phone calls, of attempting to get a restraining order, of attempting to get you served with a contempt because you weren't following the restraining order. It was at that point that he withheld some money from the voluntary support, correct?
Where are you?
September, October, November of
86.
1986.
There was no vandalism ever in the Cypress house, except for the day that he sold the house and I bumped the car into his front door. There was never any claims of vandalism there again.
Was it September, October, and November of 1986 when he finally withheld some money from your voluntary support?
I know he did it during those months, but I don't think it was the first time.
And you've talked about this letter that he sent you that was that had a balance of minus $1,300, correct?
Yes, and the month before was 400 or something, and
May I have marked, Your Honor, as People's Exhibit
78.
A letter dated October 31st, 1986.
Somewhere.
If you could just look at this letter for me and identify it as the letter that you've been referring to where there was a negative balance of $1,300.
yes.
And it is true that even though he was attempting to get you to stop the vulgar words that you were using with the kids, that he did pay for your mortgage that month, that he did pay for your gasoline bill that month, that he did pay a $430 bill at the Polo store, and that he also did send you your Hampstead check for $2,300, correct?
So what?
Well, it wasn't really a negative $1,300, was it? He didn't send you negative money. He didn't tell you you owed him $1,300. In fact, he paid your mortgage bill, he paid your gas bill,
No.
and he sent you a check for $2,300.
Absolutely.
Your Honor, and I would object to Sims facts, not evidence.
Overruled, I assume that's what's indicated in the letter, Exhibit
Not only
78.
was that
That's right.
minus,
Excuse me.
Is that what's indicated in Table 78?
That's it. That's Exhibit 78, yes.
Your Honor, it says that she owes, it's minus $1,300.
The letter
the-
speaks for
the letter-
itself.
Best evidence for the letter is what the letter says.
And you also received a check from Dan Broderick for $10,000 in November of 1986 so that you could cover expenses.
was that the advance on community that Mr. Hargreaves got?
Yes?
Well, that's my money that he's sending me as an advance on community. It wasn't a support payment. So it was my money that he forwarded to me.
There was a stipulation that Mr. Hargraves got for you because you were claiming you didn't have enough money in November of 1986 so that Dan Broderick would pay you $10,000, correct?
And another 10 to Mr. Hargreaves of community property, right. I believe that's the same time.
Your Honor, may I have marked as People's Exhibit 79 a stipulation in order?
So Mark,
If you could simply identify that, is that a stipulation for you to receive $10,000 in November of 1986?
I think so, yeah.
There was also another stipulation that Mr. Hargraves got for you, for Dan Broderick to send you $4,300, $2,000 towards the Christmas trip, another $2,300, as well as $10,000 for Mr. Hargraves' attorney's fees, correct?
I don't know what happened with that. That was very confusing, but I don't think I got that money and we didn't go on the Christmas trip.
Well, you got the $10,000 in November of 1986, didn't you?
Yes, that was my money, that he was finally, of all the community, he was going to let me have $10,000 of my money.
And it was November of, well, let's just have this identified. People's 80-year honor, check written to Elizabeth Broderick, dated November 13th, 1986.
so Mark,
Is that the check that you received for $10,000?
I guess. It's one of them, yeah.
Well, is that a check that was written to you from Dan Broderick, and is it endorsed on the back by yourself?
Right. And it says community property distribution on the bottom.
Yeah, and what do you write on the check?
No way, AH,
And what does AH mean?
asshole.
You wrote little notes like that on all the checks that Dan Broderick sent
Only
you,
when I
didn't
thought
you?
I was being cheated like this, yes.
Well,
I got cheated out of $20,000 in one day with Mr. Hargreaves, and it was a huge mistake. Dan Broderick was not supposed to be paying my support with community property. Those are two separate things.
you complained to Mr. Hargraves that you didn't have any money to live off of in October, November, December of January 1986, and that's why you needed some money. You needed the $10,000 or any money from Dan Broderick, correct?
Yeah, and it's Christmas time again, too. This is always pops up in November.
And you didn't have enough money that year to take the children for Christmas because you didn't have enough money to go skiing, correct?
The children went skiing every year at Christmas. Dan took them the previous year, so I thought I'd take them this year. Plane tickets, lift tickets, hotel rooms, etc. cost a lot of money. Dan said he'd give me the money to pay for a ski trip. I made the reservations in Utah, just like where he went in '85. I made the reservations, and then when he went to give me the money for the ski trip, he sent $2,000. And I
Which
said,
is what you had agreed on. You had
oh,
agreed on
no,
$2,000.
$2,000 wouldn't even get us on the plane, much less lift tickets and a hotel and everything.
So you
for a
wanted to
week.
go on a ski trip. In order to take the children for Christmas of that year, you wanted to go on a ski trip, and you had to have Dan Broderick pay you more money because $2,000 wasn't enough to do it.
No, that's not really it. The kids want to go on a ski trip. And if they came with me, they could go on a ski trip if I had enough money. If I didn't have enough money, they should stay with him and go on a ski trip.
Okay. And
It's their
you,
only time of the year they can go.
you refused to take them for that Christmas because you claimed you didn't have enough money to take them on the ski trip.
I couldn't afford that much money out of the budget that I had at that time. I couldn't afford over $10,000 for a week of skiing.
Your Honor, may I have marked as People's Exhibit 81, a series of 22 checks from September to December of 1986.
So, Mark,
If we could just go through these checks, Mrs. Broderick, and if you could identify them as checks that you wrote on your account. The first one dated September 3rd, 1986. Is that a check for $1,000 to Saks Fifth Avenue?
A charge payment, yeah.
September 2nd, 1986, is that a check for $511 to Bullock's?
Yes.
September 2nd, 1986, is this a check for $1,000 to Home Federal on your MasterCard?
Right.
September 3rd, 1986, a check for $1,000 on Great American MasterCard?
Right.
October 2nd, 1986, a check for $1,199 to Saks Fifth Avenue?
Right.
October 2nd, 1986, a check for $500 to Great American on your MasterCard?
Right. These are all charge payments.
October 5th, 1986, a check for $200 to Home Federal?
Right.
November 6th, 1986, a check for $500 to Nordstrom's?
Right.
November 6th, 1986, a check for $700 to I Magnum?
Uh-huh. Yes.
November 6th, 1986, a check for $2,000 to Saks Fifth Avenue?
Yes.
November 6th, 1986, a check for $1,000 to Great American?
Mhm.
November 6th, 1986, another $1,000 to Home Federal?
Yes. I'm sorry.
November 25th, 1986, a check for $561.80 to CG Boutique?
Mhm. Yes.
December 1st, 1986, a check for $500 to Nordstrom?
Yes.
December 1st, 1986, a check for $1,000 to I Magnum?
Yes.
December 1st, 1986, a check for $1,500 to Saks?
Yes.
December 1st, 1986, a check for $1,000 to Home Federal?
Yes.
December 1st, 1986, a check for $1,000 to Great American?
Yes.
January 1st, 1987, a check for $1,000 to Saks Fifth Avenue?
Yes.
January 1st, 1987, a check for $1,000 to I Magnum?
Yes.
January 1st, 1986, a check for $980 to Bowers Jewelry Store?
Yes. Are these?
January 1st, 1987, a check to Great American for $1,000.
So these are 86 and 87.
It was on November 1st, 1986, that you went over to his house to confront him and you were arrested, correct?
Yes.
And you had previously testified that the reason that you went over there was because of receiving this negative $1,300 letter. That was what made you so angry.
He may have told me on the phone that morning that I wasn't getting any money that month.
Isn't it true that you previously testified that the reason you went over there was because you had received that letter that showed a negative $1,300 balance and that's what made you so angry?
I knew that I was getting minus $1,300. That's what he told me. I don't know if I had I don't remember having the letter in my hand, but that's what he told me because of the fines of going to his house when he was in Europe and calling him names on the phone.
That's not what you testified to before, though, was it? It was because you said that you had received that letter. You'd received the negative 1,300 letter, and that's what you were so angry about, and that's why you went over there.
I
You're
mean,
obviously angry about something.
I went over there because he told me I was getting minus $1,300. I don't know if it was in the letter or in person. But that's what he told me, and I went over there and said, how can I, pay the bills and live? And the previous month, I only got $1,000 something, and the next month, I only got $454.
But you didn't receive that negative $1,300 until November the 9th, a whole week after November the 1st.
No, I don't know. I would have had it before then. What's the date on it?
This assumes facts not in evidence. The district attorney's already testified she got the payment every week, beginning of every month,
Sustained.
first week.
Sustained.
Would it refresh your recollection to see a diary entry dated November the 9th, Monday, in which you indicate money, negative 1,300 arrives?
This is a diary page on 11/9. That doesn't mean that money arrived on that day. I was thrown in jail that day, and I obviously didn't make any entries in any diary.
November the 9th, it says November the 9th, Monday, right next to it. So that's Monday, November the 9th, and underneath that, you've written money, negative 1,300 arrives, correct?
That doesn't mean it arrived on 11/9. In fact, did you show me that it arrived earlier on those checks previous?
No.
That doesn't mean that it arrived on 11/9. It should have arrived by the 2nd or the 3rd. November 1st was a Saturday.
You
Maybe,
have said that you were upset on November the 1st, 1986, because Dan Broderick was reigning president of the San Diego Bar Association and was brazen enough to be flaunting his receptionist as his girlfriend at the Blackstone Ball. Talk about giving someone the middle finger. That's what you were upset about on November the 1st, correct?
I didn't know it was the Blackstone Ball until I got over there, until I saw Dan and he was getting ready for it. I didn't know it was that night. And I did think years later, whenever that is that you're reading, years later, I thought, that son of a bitch. I mean, look what he's doing. But that night, I didn't even know it. All I was mad about is I wasn't getting any money to live that month. I was getting minus $1,300, and he did charge me the next month, the minus $1,300.
You were obviously spending money to live that month, though, correct?
I had been living on credit cards totally and nonstop since February of '85 when he walked out. I carried at least $50,000 in credit card debt at all times. So every time I got any money, I paid down credit cards, but I basically lived on credit cards.
When you wrote this, that Dan Broderick was flaunting his receptionist as his girlfriend at the Blackstone Ball and talk about giving someone the middle finger. This was November 1st of 1986. It had been 22 months since you had been separated, correct? Almost
Your Honor,
2 years.
Your Honor, I'll object that I don't believe that was written November 1st, 1986.
Well, show her.
No, I'm not indicating it was written November the 1st. I'm talking about, that's what you're saying about November the 1st.
Yes, looking back, that's right, that he cut me off from no money. It was after the bifurcation, and he was treating me like that, and then he's showing up, with his girlfriend. At the same time, he's treating me like that. I just thought it was horrible. I thought it was bizarre.
Okay, so on November the 1st, 1986, 22 months after separation, you thought that it was horrible that he was
That I had
dating someone.
That I had no monthly support and that I had no settlement.
That's-
22 months later, correct.
Objection, that also assumes facts not in evidence and is argumentative.
Overruled. That's consent.
I'm not talking right now about the money. I'm talking about your statement that he was brazen enough to be dating someone else 22 months after separation.
No, not dating someone else. I obviously knew he was dating Linda from the very beginning. I thought it was brazen that he would throw his wife of so many years in jail for simply coming to him and saying, what am I supposed to do here? How do you want me to live? You've got the restraining orders, you've got the kids, you've got all the money, you've got all the control. What do you want out of me? It doesn't matter that he was dating Linda Kolkina 22 months later. It matters that I've got no settlement and have no life and no home and no car and nothing. That's what matters.
In November of 1986, you had no home and no car? Is that what you're
Right, they
saying?
were both in Dan Broderick's name, so I didn't feel that I had a home of my own or was driving even a car of my own. I had no court-ordered support, so I didn't know that I could make monthly payments if I went out and got a home or car of my own. I had no way to go get a home or car of my own.
And he was brazen enough to be dating somebody else.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is
No,
something that
obviously, I knew he was
you-
dating.
Sustained.
What,
I just,
that is what you,
Just stop interrupting each other. You're gonna have a terrible record. You're both talking at once. Just go one at a time.
that is what you say there. Those are your
what is that?
words.
What is that there?
Housewives revolt,
That's in 1988 or something?
and are these not your words?
No, they are
Dan
my
Broderick
words, yes. They are my words in 88 or 89, whenever I wrote that I, looking back, I thought he was a son of a bitch. I thought he was horrible. But it wasn't that he was dating somebody else at all. It had nothing to do with it. It had to do with the way he was treating me.
He was flaunting his
And the children.
receptionist as his girlfriend at the Blackstone Ball. That's what you're
Those were my
saying.
words in 88 or 89, yes.
And you were angry about that. You were angry about the fact that he was taking Linda to the Blackstone Ball.
I was angry about the fact that he had the nerve to throw me in jail for simply coming to his home after 22 months of separation and the 2.5 years that went before that, and saying, come on, Dan, what do you want me to do here?
When
What
you
do you
got
want me to do?
jail, you did call Gail Forbes and tell her to call the newspapers, didn't you?
No, I didn't. I called a different girl. Gail
You're-
Forbes wasn't home.
You're saying that you never had that conversation with
No.
Gail Forbes that she testified to?
No,
That you asked her to call?
that's a
Burl-
lie. I never asked anybody to call. And why would anybody call Burl Stiff? Burl Stiff is a party reporter. That's not hardly his line of work.
You were,
No, she's making that all up. That never happened. I called a different friend who called Brad, who came to get me.
you were represented by Bill Hargraves at the time, weren't you?
No,
You had signed a retainer agreement, and you paid him a retainer in September of 1986.
I've already testified to that I hired him to file one paper called a response to the divorce. I did not retain him as an attorney on this case, and he did file the response.
You had contacted him, you had paid him a $750 retainer to file something on your
Right,
behalf.
and he
He
did
was
that.
representing you at that time.
No. I never gave him a retainer or hired him to represent me on the big case. As I've said, he wasn't the kind of lawyer I needed, but I needed someone to file a response, and I didn't know how to do that. So I said, how much will it be to file a response?
He was the one that you ultimately went to go get a support order for you, right?
Yes, yes.
So there was no need to go over and confront Dan Broderick on November the 1st about your money situation.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. There's a retainer agreement and evidence, best evidence is there since time she was retained.
Sustained.
Well, it is true that it was possible for you to have called Mr. Hargraves, who you had had contact with and was representing you in some capacity since September, to ask him to do the confronting or to do something about getting some more money.
I've already
Objection
said,
calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Was there anything preventing you from calling up Mr. Hargraves in November to ask for help?
I didn't want to use Bill Hargraves. I didn't think he was the kind of lawyer I needed. And there was also nothing preventing Dan Broderick from settling with me on any terms. There was nothing keeping him from writing a check.
Mr. Broderick did pay $10,000 to Bill Hargraves for attorney's fees, correct?
Against my wishes and without my knowing it, yes. That was my money that Dan sent Bill Hargraves, the same $10,000 he refused to send Mr. Jaffe for over a year.
That's right. You were angry, you say, because he wouldn't pay the $10,000 according to you to Mr. Jaffe,
That's right.
and nothing got filed and nothing got done, and Mr. Jaffe didn't represent you.
Right.
Then you went to hire Mr. Hargraves. Now, in order to get anything done, he pays Mr. Hargraves to represent you. He pays the $10,000, and now he's the bad guy for paying the attorney's fees, correct?
That's not the way it's supposed to go. We're supposed to do it the way Mr. Jaffe said to do it, is that $10,000 comes out of both pockets, and the judge later decides who pays what.
And that's
Dan Broderick decided that it would only come out of my pocket.
Mrs. Broderick, isn't that stipulation say that it's an advance on community property? Community property is property that belongs to the two of you.
No, it
It
says
was being
advance on
paid-
my half of the community property is what the letter says.
You testified that Dan at one point did take you to see Dr. Zedimer in 1985, correct?
I didn't realize the day we went that he was taking me. I thought we went to Dr. Zedimer in La Jolla.
He wanted you to go see Dr. Zedimer.
I thought we were going together, but as it turned out, yes.
Well, obviously, he had expressed some concern, and he wanted you to go see Dr. Zedemer, or wanted both of you, whatever you understood, there was some concern there about having you see Dr. Zedemer.
Oh, yeah, Dan wanted me committed.
Did he ask Dr. Zedemer to commit you?
Not on that day because I didn't stay. I left. If Dan wasn't going to stay and have some sort of therapy together, I was not going to fall into that trap again.
This was October of 1985, when you've already testified that you understood that you were getting divorced. He filed the divorce papers
Correct.
on you.
Correct.
So you knew that there was no desire on his part to get couples counseling. He'd filed the dissolution in September of 1985.
But I didn't know that.
You've been served with the papers.
Not in September.
Okay, that's what it says on your board over there, that you were
No,
served
it
with
says
the dissolution.
filed. I wasn't served until October 28th.
Okay.
And I never knew that they were filed until much later. And I don't remember, if you have it in front of you, the exact date of Dr. Zedemer. I'm not sure if I did get those first divorce papers.
Whether you'd gotten the divorce papers or not, you knew by October of 1985 that you were not getting back together. You knew that there was a divorce impending. You knew that he was filing for divorce.
I'm not sure if I did actually know that, but I did also know that I had at least 5 friends, male and female, going through similar things. And it would have.
Mrs. Broderick, excuse me, that's, if you just answer my question, you knew that you and Dan were getting a divorce.
I'm not sure if I did on that day. I'm not
You
sure.
knew that it was Dr. Zedemer who wanted to see you by yourself, not the two of you, that he explained that to you. That he-
Why would Dr. Zedemer want to see me? He doesn't know me from Adam.
When you went to see him, when Dan took you there, he told you that this is not couples therapy. This is something that I think I need to see you about.
And he just wanted to see me for no reason.
No, there was a lot of reason. It had to do with
And
all
Dan
of the
told him
vandalism
that he should.
and all of the horrible
I see.
language you were using for the kids and how traumatic it was for them, and something needed to be done. Your rage was out of control. Is that not correct?
Oh, Dan felt that something needed to be done about me, yes.
Well, Dan wasn't the only one, was he? Your friends tried to get you to do something too. Didn't Jeannie Milliken and Lynn McGuire try to get you to go to that program in Florida that you refused to go to?
You're a little mixed up. No. Lynn McGuire and Hillary Brady wanted me to go to the codependency program because they could see that I was upset and suffering and stuff. And Jeannie Milliken didn't have anything to do with that.
Jeannie Milliken wasn't there and wasn't part of that conversation and encouraging you to go to this program in Florida, telling
Absolutely not. No.
you that they had talked to Dan and that Dan was willing to pay for it, that they'd already gotten the reservations, that they'd gotten the plane ticket. It was all ready to go and you refused to go.
Jeannie Milliken had nothing. I hadn't seen her for months or years or talked to her on the phone or anything. She had nothing to do with any of that. Lynn McGuire and Hillary Brady came to my house very late one night around 11 o'clock and woke me up. And they had this scheme that they were going to send me to Florida to this program. And I couldn't leave San Diego. It was when my house was empty and everything. I thought Dan would sell the house if I left.
Yeah, you
And I didn't want to
indicated-
leave the kids.
You indicated that you didn't, that you felt you were afraid to go to Florida because you thought Dan might sell the house if you left. Hadn't you gone to Canada for a month? You weren't afraid about going to Canada, that Dan
I think it
would
was
sell the
7 or
house.
10 days to Canada. And Dan didn't know about it because it was the summer and the kids were not at Coral Reef.
And what exactly had Dan done to make you think he was going to sell Calle de Cielo?
I told you, I always thought he would. He sold Coral Reef that had 10 years worth of equity in it. This house had no equity. I thought it would be gone like that. I used to joke around and say, oh my God, I've been away from home for 4 hours. Maybe my house is gone.
And it never happened, did it, Mrs. Broderick?
No, he finally took his name off it when he was court ordered, but not voluntarily.
Okay, let's talk about the sale of Coral Reef. You indicated that the sale of Coral Reef came as a total shock. That was your testimony.
Yes,
It is true that you knew that Dan Jaffe and Mr. Ashworth, who was representing Dan Broderick, had been negotiating for the sale of Coral Reef for months.
Mr. Jaffe came down that one day. He was not involved in negotiating for the sale over months. He came down that one day.
You knew that they'd been sending letters back and forth to each other regarding how to sell Coral Reef.
No, I don't know about that, but I know he came down that one day and tried to strike a deal, and I would
Your
not
Honor,
sell it.
May I have Marcus Peoples Exhibit 81?
82.
82, a series of letters. One dated December 31st, 1985. One dated January 2nd, 1986. and one dated January 14th, 1986.
So marked.
If you could take a look at these letters that are letters between Mr. Jaffe and Mr. Ashworth, do you recognize those letters?
I really don't know.
Copies were sent to you, weren't they? Down at the bottom, it indicates that copies were sent to Elizabeth Broderick.
It does say that, yes, but I was not this one says I should call a real estate agent, so I definitely wouldn't have done that. It says that's called Peggy Chodorow, and I wasn't gonna sell the house, so I wouldn't have called a real estate agent. And this wants me to sign a quitclaim deed, which I wouldn't have done either. This one here, you want me to look at that? Okay, now,
Are those not letters in which they're discussing the sale of the Coral Reef property?
yes, it looks, yes,
And the letters begin as far back as December of 85, December of 85, January of 86. You were aware that your attorney, the attorney representing you at the time, and Mr. Broderick's attorney were negotiating for the sale of Coral Reef, correct?
I don't know if they were. I wasn't selling Coral Reef until it was part of a package.
The question is, were you not aware that your attorney was negotiating that with Mr. Broderick's attorney?
I don't know if he was, I don't know.
You did receive these letters.
Yes?
Mr. Jaffe also sent another letter dated January the 9th that's already been marked as People's 48. Do you recognize that letter? If you just indicate for me yes or no, do you recognize that letter? It indicates that a copy of that was also sent to you.
If it says that, yes.
And isn't it true, Mrs. Broderick, that in this letter, Mr. Jaffe says, I have now been able to determine, after speaking with Mrs. Broderick, the nature of her reluctance in signing the document to sell the Coral Reef property. I hope I can solve the impasse by the suggestion contained in this letter, which has been approved by Mrs. Broderick. It is Mrs. Broderick's contention.
Here, I'm gonna object. This is improper, it's improper questioning.
Yeah, sustained. Just gonna ask her a question about the letter.
Yes.
You can do that without reading the letter.
Was it not your contention that $47,000 of presumably community funds were spent on the Coral Reef property since the parties separated on improvements that Mrs. Broderick did not approve of? Was that not your contention?
I don't know. I mean, if that was the argument he was doing at that time, that was fine.
Well,
with
you
me.
testified that you testified earlier that you didn't want to sell Coral Reef, that you had no desire to sell Coral Reef because you thought that it would be a profitable rental, correct?
I also thought I might end up living back in it with the children.
Is there anything, if you would just read this first page to yourself, where Dan Jaffe sets out your contentions, is there anything in that page that says anything about you wanting to hold on to the property because it would be a rental or because you would be moving back into it? Excuse me, Mrs. Broderick, if you would just read the first page, which is where it talks about that.
And what's your question?
Is there anything that it says in there about your desire to hold on to the property for any reason?
All this letter says to me is he's looking, I'm prepared
Mrs.
to
Broderick,
go forward.
excuse If you could answer my question.
I can't answer your question.
Does it say anything in that letter about you wanting to hold on to the property, or does it not say you just want $47,000 more than Dan Broderick gets?
Your Honor.
This letter says different things to me.
I'm gonna object. It's argumentative.
It's not argumentative, Mr. Overruled. Just answer the question. Is it in there or isn't it? In the first page. Yes or no?
Mrs. Broderick contends that, and then it is listed. Is there anything in your contention there that you wanted to hold on to the property because it was a profitable rental?
I don't
Yes or
know.
no?
I don't know. I'd have to read this whole letter and then I'll tell you what this letter says to me, because this letter says entirely different things to me.
I'm not asking what the letter says to you. I'm asking if there's anything in there that says you're contending.
My attorney might have said that I contended those things. That was his argument at the time, but there's other arguments in here, like he doesn't have his 10,000 retainer and he will not go forward on the case until he gets it. That's what that
Doesn't
letter
it say that she contends that she was not consulted concerning any of the improvements? That the improvements were either not properly done or done in such a manner as to depreciate the property? It's her contention, therefore, that Coral Reef property had a value of at least $325,000. The proposed selling price before Mr. Broderick expended $47,000 of community funds without her consent. And I have proposed the following to Mrs. Broderick, and she has accepted my suggestion. And that was to sell the property and to give you $47,000 over the 50% split.
but I never agreed to that.
Do you think that Mr. Jaffe was lying in here when he said he discussed this with you and that this was your contention and what you wanted?
Your Honor,
No, I
objection argumentative.
Sustained.
It is true that you received $127,000 in cash after the sale of Coral Reef in March of 1987, excuse me, isn't it?
I don't know when I received it. I did get some money after the forced sale and after I was in the mental institution, but I still didn't want to sell it.
My question was, did you receive $127,000 after the sale of that property?
I know I received some money, yes.
May I have Mark, Your Honor, as people's next in order?
People's 83,
Reports to be a settlement statement.
so Mark.
If you would take a look at this settlement statement with respect to the sale of the property. Does it not indicate that one half of the proceeds plus $40,000 was paid to Elizabeth Broderick for a total of $127,784.41?
Yes,
And one half of the proceeds less $40,000 was paid to Daniel Broderick for a total of $47,000.
at that time, yes, but then I had to pay it back to him, the difference.
Did you not receive this money in 1986?
86?
March of 1986, yes,
Okay.
which was when, well, was that when Coral Reef
I
was
just
sold?
get confused with the years, yeah. Okay, fine.
Did you drive through the front door of Dan's house in February of 1986?
I just kind of bumped it, yeah.
Okay. And you did receive $127,000 the next month, didn't you?
That's what it says there.
What did you do with that $127,000?
It was a community property split. I was not supposed to be supporting myself with it, which is what Dan wanted me to do all along, which is why he wasn't paying support payments. So I invested $100,000 of it in a life insurance policy, and I immediately spent the other $27,000 trying to make the home that I had livable for humans.
You invested $100,000 in 1986, and you spent the $27,000 on fixing up your home in 1986.
I believe so.
You also obviously could have spent $10,000 in paying Dan Jaffe his retainer fee at the time if you'd wanted, correct?
After the sale of the house, the day that the house was sold, and Mr. Jaffe informed me of the 4-hour notice. He said that we can expect this through the whole proceeding. So I said, well, my God.
Excuse me, Mr. Broderick.
No,
My
I wasn't
question
gonna-
was, you could have paid $10,000 to Mr. Jaffe to represent you at that time, correct?
After the 4-hour notice, I didn't think hiring Dan Jaffe was a good idea because he told me that Dan would use the 4-hour notice at every opportunity.
You basically fired Dan Jaffe at that time.
I never hired him, so I couldn't have fired him.
When you told Jeanette DeWise that you were dissatisfied with his actions on your behalf and you could no longer use him.
I only realize even now how damaged I was by his inaction. He should have told me the day I signed that agreement in October 1985, the danger that I was in. I did not comprehend that this house could be sold, that Dan could pull the rug out from under me on the money, and that Dan would get sole custody, no visitation of the children.
Mrs.
I didn't
Broderick,
know.
we're in February of 1986, and didn't Dan Jaffe, when he came down for that meeting, and when he got the agreement, and when he recommended that you sign it, he told you that if you didn't sign it, the property could get sold.
No, he
And
didn't.
so when he testified to that, he was mistaken.
I firmly believed that with my name on that house, that nobody could sell that house unless I agreed to it.
And Mr. Jaffe explained to you that that wasn't true, and that's
No.
why he got you a good deal. And in fact, he told Jeanette DeWise that you wouldn't follow his directions. You wouldn't follow his advice.
He didn't give me that advice. That's why I was so taken off guard when I got
So
that phone call that
when
said
he-
the house was gone. I just didn't understand that anyone could sell that house without
Well,
my
you were-
permission.
You were there at that meeting, right? You were sitting down in the car when he went up.
Right, right.
He came down and went up, and he came down several times, negotiating the price of that.
And I
Not-
wouldn't agree to it. Right. I wouldn't agree to it. And I didn't know that the house could be sold by force in court with that word, the elicer. I had no idea that could happen. And I didn't want the house sold. I wanted it as part of a settlement. I've explained before, it was the only thing I could see that I knew had my name on half. Everything else I had no idea of.
Let this be a good time to take a morning recess. Ms.
Sure,
Walsh.
Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess at this time. We'll be in recess until 11:15. Please remember the admonition. Matter of the people of the state of California versus Elizabeth Broderick. Court finds all members of the jury panel are present. All counsel are present. Mrs. Broderick is present. May we proceed, Ms. Wells?
Thank you.
When you indicated that you heard the news from Mr. Jaffe that the house had been sold, you acknowledged that he told you that you had received the 4-hour notice, correct? He told you that he had received that.
A telephone call.
And you were at home at the time. You were in the process of cooking dinner for guests. You had your parents over there at the time, right?
Yes, and Brian from Canada was there.
And you indicated that you dropped everything and charged over to Dan Broderick's house.
I told him I'd be right back.
You didn't tell your parents anything about where you were going or why you were going. You didn't tell the children anything about where you were going or why you were going. You just charged out of the house.
I think I told him I'd be right back. I have to talk to Dan.
Your parents were extremely upset about how you just charged out of the house that day, weren't they?
I don't know.
Did they ever indicate anything to that effect to you after the fact?
No.
You went over to Dan Broderick's house because you wanted to confront him. You were angry. You indicated you were absolutely furious at that point, correct?
When I got the 4-hour notice that, or was heard that the house was sold in court that
When
day.
you drove over to Dan Broderick's house, you were furious. You were angry. You wanted to confront him about it.
I wanted to know what happened to the house and who he sold it to and how much he got and where my half was and how he had done that.
And you were angry, correct?
I guess so, yeah.
And Dan Broderick knew from past experience, I mean, we're now in 1986, that when you were angry, you could be violent. You could be destructive.
Your Honor, objection calls for conclusion speculation.
Same.
Hadn't you been violent with Dan Broderick only about 3 days before this incident? Hadn't you attacked him?
But
On January 30th, which would have been only a couple of days before this occurred, did you not attack him when he came over to pick up one of your daughters? Didn't you follow him back to the house and attack him with the metal key ring over the head?
not that I've heard of before.
Would it refresh your recollection to see a report that's dated January 30th, 1986?
I hope so. I don't remember this. I don't know what vacation he's talking about. I don't remember that.
So you don't remember any incident that would have occurred on the 30th of January, only a couple of days before this?
Sorry, I don't.
Did you ever hit Mr. Broderick on any other incident with your metal key ring or kick him?
I heard Lee say on the stand that when I banged the car into the door, I was hitting him with a key ring. Isn't that what somebody said? And that's the only thing that I know.
On any other incident, had you done that at any other time?
Not that I
Had
remember
you
at all.
thrown rocks at him in the past?
Not that I remember, no.
Had you ripped off his antenna of his car?
Oh, I know he said things like that in court years later, that I'd scratched his car and ripped his antenna off, but
You've admitted to ripping his antenna off, haven't you?
I wasn't ripping his antenna off. Yes, I had his antenna in my hand when he pulled away, yeah.
Whether or not you recall this incident on the 30th, it is true that you had acted violently in the past when you were angry, correct?
Well, smushing the pie around and breaking a window, I guess, but he
And-
wasn't there either of those times.
And burning clothes and throwing stereos and smashing windows, etc. Those are things that he was well aware of in February of 1986, correct?
Yeah, but well, keep going, I guess.
So when you were there at his house in violation of a restraining order and angry, and given the history that there was between the two of you, he basically asked you to leave, to contact your attorney, that he didn't want to talk to you, correct?
Your Honor, Jack is argumentative.
Overruled. You can answer that.
When he pulled up, the girls and I were standing out back, and I wasn't violent or threatening or anything at all. And yes, he didn't want to talk to me. He didn't want to tell me what he had done, and he never wanted to talk to me. He wanted to deal with me in court.
And so, well, were you angry at the time, though?
That he wouldn't talk to me?
Were you angry there when he pulled up?
Not really. I just said, and the girls were there. I said, look, I just want to talk to him, and he wouldn't talk to me. It's the same as November 1st when I was there. I was just simply there.
And the girls
To
don't
talk to
describe you as being very angry at the time?
Not that I know of, no.
So he asked you to leave, and you weren't angry at the time, and you left, and you went over to Coral Reef and tried to burn the house on fire, correct?
I don't remember any of that. We went in his house, at his house, and he was saying he was going to talk to me, but he really didn't talk to me, so I just left.
You don't remember going over to Coral Reef afterwards?
I know, I was very, very upset. I was absolutely furious that he wouldn't talk to me, that he wouldn't.
The question is, do you remember going over to Coral Reef after you left his house and lighting it on fire and smashing the sliding glass door?
I know you have pictures of that, but I don't remember doing that.
You do remember after you left Coral Reef, coming back and driving your car into his front door, though, right?
Yeah.
So there's this blank spot of memory from the time that you left his house. There's just a total blank until the time that you're driving back to his house to smash into it.
I don't know how much of a blank there is, how much of a time.
Well, what
Is
do you
it?
remember after you left his house? What did you do? Where did you go?
I was just all shaking and all upset, and I didn't know what to do, and I was just absolutely furious that he wouldn't deal with me and that he had stolen the house, and I went back and I bammed the car into his front door on purpose.
Well, you drove back to La Jolla, though. I mean, obviously, you had some
I don't
options.
remember.
You could have gone back to your house where your parents were and where your guests were. You didn't do that, even though you drove back to La Jolla. You drove to the house in Coral Reef, correct?
I don't remember. When
does the memory pick up then on the way back to Dan Broderick's house?
I don't remember on the way back to Dan Broderick's house. I just remember banging into his door and being careful not to hit one of those white columns that's holding up a roof or something.
And when you say banging into his door, you say that you just bumped into the front door?
Mhm.
Do you think that the bump is what caused this damage?
Yes.
Okay, that's what you would describe as a bump?
With a car, yes.
And you backed up and you bumped again, didn't you?
I don't remember that. I just remember
Did you
banging
hear Lee
into the door.
testify that you did that?
I thought it was Kim and the chainsaw noise and all that stuff that said that.
Did you hear Lee testify about you backing up and going again and Dan yelling, "Beth, what are you doing?"
I don't remember that myself. If
Okay.
Lee said that, I didn't remember him hitting me until Lee said it.
You have made a statement in the past, for example, when you wrote in your book in 1988, I drove back to his mansion in the slums and purposely and carefully rammed my car into his front door just to show him he couldn't get away with this. Correct? That was your statement.
Yes.
So in 1988, you didn't have any problems remembering driving back and carefully and purposefully ramming your car into his front door.
No, in 1988, I didn't have any problem remembering it.
Okay. You also had a knife in your car at the time too, correct? When you drove over to his house.
I've heard testimony to that. I don't remember that. I don't know if there was a knife. Nobody said I had a knife in my hand or anything.
So you don't recall having a large knife that was found on the floorboard of your car that day when you were arrested?
I'm sorry, I don't.
You told the people at Claremont Hospital after you were arrested that day that you were perfectly justified in what you had done, didn't you?
I was furious.
And you felt perfectly justified. That was totally
banging into
justified
his
what
door.
you had done. And you didn't have any concern about the fact that you could have injured either one of your children who might have been coming out the front door when you rammed your car into it.
The children were in the back of the house. Two of the children were with me. The larger children were Dan in the back of the house. There was
How do you know the children were in the back of the house?
because
You'd been
I had
gone.
just left there.
You'd been gone over to Coral. We'd driven all the way over to La Jolla. You'd gotten a can of gasoline. You'd tried to light the house on fire. You'd thrown a brick through the sliding glass door. You'd driven all the way back from La Jolla. How did you know your children were in the process of walking out that front door?
No, I didn't. I just guessed they were in the back of the house because that's where they were. That's
And
where
if-
they were eating dinner, I think.
The last time you testified, you said before you were shown those photographs, you said you weren't concerned because the whole house was under construction and the whole front of the house had drapes and there was no furniture and everything was under construction.
That's what I thought.
And that was not true, was it?
I still thought it was like that.
The only reason that you've had to back off on that is because you've been confronted with those photographs. Isn't that true?
But I haven't backed off on that. That was my memory of that time.
You indicated to Jeanette DeWise in 1989, in January of 1989, you had a full recollection of ramming your car through the front door, and you told Jeanette DeWise you were proud of it. I'd do it again, only I'd do it better, is what you said.
In 1989, what you're calling a full recollection is that, I knew that happened way back then, but it's not a moment-to-moment recollection of actually what I thought or was feeling and that happened at that time. It's that many years later.
Well, when Jeanette DeWise was asking you about it, you didn't tell her that you didn't have any recollection of it, and you didn't know really what happened, or you
She
didn't
wasn't
remember.
Objection or argumentative.
Did you tell Jeanette DeWise that you didn't have any recollection or you didn't remember what happened?
She wasn't.
I'm going to object because she's read what she said, which is what she's testified to. It's argumentative.
That last question is not argumentative overruled.
She wasn't cross-examining me about little things like that. It was just a very simplistic, that's what happened that day. Very simplistic. She didn't ask me, what did you remember about this and what did you remember about that? It wasn't a detailed recollection, but I know I banged my car into his door on that day. And I know as time went on, not on that day, as time went on, I made jokes about if I had known it was going to get so much publicity, I would have done it a lot better. That doesn't have anything to do with what was happening that day.
You didn't just tell her that you banged your car. You said you purposefully and carefully rammed your car into his front door to make a point, correct?
In 1989, I probably said that, yes.
And are you changing that now? Are you saying
No.
something different now?
Absolutely not.
And you did tell her that you were sorry you didn't do it better. If I'd known how much press attention I'd get for it.
Right, because you keep saying driving my car through his house and through his front door. That's a different visual from what actually happened. If everyone was going to blame me for driving my car through his house, I should have probably driven my car through his house.
Is that what you were thinking? You were sorry you didn't do it better? You wanted to drive the car through it more?
It was
Is that
a
what you're
joke.
saying?
It was a joke that if it was, when it happened back then, there was nothing that had gone since then.
Did you consider what you did to the door that day and driving your car through his front door? Did you consider that a joke?
No.
Objection argumentative. The front door is there. Nothing was driven through the front door.
If I said through the front door, driving it into the front door, did you consider that a joke?
I didn't consider him stealing the house from me and refusing to deal with me a joke either. I thought nothing was funny.
My question was, did you consider
No.
your
She
conduct?
she
No.
answered that no.
That's not
on
a
the subject.
joke.
Just a minute. You answered that no already. Go ahead. On something else.
And you knew at the time when you were describing it that you scared Dan Broderick too, when you did it. That was the point, right?
I was madder than heck at him, and I did it on purpose.
And your words were that you scared the shit out of him, right?
I don't know. I don't know if that's what I said. I don't know that I'm sure he was alarmed, but I have never heard directly from him.
We're looking at what you have called your book on page 68. Did you not say, I scared the shit out of him?
And he came out of the house and started beating me up. That's what it says there.
Did you say I scared the shit out of him?
And there I did, yes. But I didn't know then that fact.
But you didn't know then that fact?
When it happened in 1986, the book is in 88 later.
And you have lied to people about this incident since it happened, correct?
The Michael Campbell thing,
For example, to Michael Campbell, you denied that you did that to Michael Campbell.
I purposely did not want to discuss this with Michael Campbell in 1989, I believe, because Linda Coquina had no business calling a place of work of mine and telling him things that went on years ago. And she told him that I was going to burn his office down and that I was a violent person and I was going to kill him and that I had this machine gun. And I was like, I said, oh, I thought,
You're saying that Linda Coquina said those things to Michael Campbell?
I think
That
that's
that you had a machine gun and you were going to burn his office down?
She told him I was going to burn his office down, that I wanted to see her wedding pictures, that I had a machine gun and I was going to kill everyone at her wedding. And I think those are like the three things, none of which were true.
The fact of the matter is that Michael Campbell asked you if you had driven your car into
Right.
Dan Broderick's door, and you lied.
I didn't discuss it with him.
You said
don't-
no. You didn't just discuss it with him. You said, no, Dan and Linda are making that up. They've been making these things up about me all along. Didn't you say that to Michael
I
Campbell?
can't remember exactly what I said, but I said I thought that this would stop when they got married, but obviously it hasn't stopped, and she's been calling and people and telling stories on me all over town, and I thought it would stop. And I did deny that those things had happened because I didn't want to bring up the past. I was trying to get a new life going.
And this was an example, though, of what you were telling him was a lie of Linda Coquina's, that she was making this up.
That she was spreading lies about me, right? Because she mainly called about me seeing her wedding pictures, and that was a total lie.
When you went to Claremont Hospital after this incident, you did refuse any kind of treatment from anyone there, correct?
I think so.
You refused a medical examination, you refused any lab examination, you refused meals, you refused any type of socialization with anyone. You made, quote, no effort to deal with what was going on, unquote. Is that correct?
If that's what their report says, I'm sure it's true.
And it is true that you did know that you could get out earlier, that you were given the opportunity to sign papers to leave.
No, that's not true. I thought I was put there for a 72-hour hold. That's all I knew. And when it was time to check out, they wanted me to sign papers to voluntarily commit myself for longer treatment, and I just laughed at them and left. But I had no idea I could get out earlier. If I had, I would have.
Can you explain why the report would say she refused to sign herself into?
I object to proper records.
And
Would it refresh your recollection to look at the report that was written? This paragraph. Read to yourself, please.
She refused to,
Excuse me.
and that says exactly what I just said, that I refused to sign myself into the hospital, and I
And
preferred to
refused
leave
to-
at the expiration of her 72-hour hold.
Refused to sign herself into the hospital and refused to leave the hospital.
I
Preferred
was
to.
never given a choice to leave the hospital. Was on a 72-hour hold.
Do you recall giving papers to sign to release you from the 17-hour hold and tearing them up?
No. I'm adamant about not signing any papers. I wouldn't sign any papers, signing me in or out or anything.
Requested papers to
Signed
release from
papers.
72-hour hold?
and transfer to voluntary status. I would not voluntarily commit myself. That was the only offer they gave me, was to voluntarily commit myself when the 72 hours was up. And I said, no way. And I just left.
You have acknowledged that you did use vulgar language in front of your children, correct?
Yes, later on in this whole thing, yes. In 83, 84, 85, I don't think so.
You used
Towards
very-
86, I was getting a little hot, and in 87, I was ranting,
In
yes.
85, 86, 87, 88, and 89, you were using vulgar language, you were using sexually explicit language to your children, correct?
Well, if you, the same names over and over. It was-
When you separated in 1985, how old was Rhett?
Rhett was born in 79.
He was 6 years old.
Right.
And you even had Rhett call up his dad once and ask him if he had to pay Linda to sleep with him.
No, Rhett did that. I know Rhett did that, but I didn't have Rhett do that.
A little 6-year-old boy did that all on his own.
Rhett is extremely vocal and extremely angry at a lot of people for what went on here, and he did horrible things like that, and he did it on purpose.
In 1986.
I don't know when he did it, but I know he did it, and we have other tapes of him just making a tape that was not on a phone machine with very hateful and explicitly horrible things in it that he wanted to tell his father.
When we'll talk about that in just a second. You indicated that you didn't think that there was anything wrong at all with the language that you were using in front of the children. You didn't think there was anything wrong with calling their father or calling Linda. You didn't think there was anything wrong with that, right?
Well, I had a change of heart there where I swallowed everything and didn't tell them anything that was going on in 83 and 84 and into 85. They never heard from me about the affair. They never heard Linda's name. They didn't know why I was crying and hysterical and shaking and upset and short-tempered with them. And then when Dan filed the papers and did all these horrible things, I figured I'm telling them what went on here, and I did.
And you didn't think there was anything wrong with that. In fact, you said,
I think
As
I did
long
them
as-
more harm by covering up. Not exactly lying to them, but I covered up and I harmed them and myself. And from now on, I was just telling them exactly the truth.
well, you thought it was funny, though. You thought it was funny not only to call Linda, but to have the boys call her, too. Did you laugh about that
There
with
were-
Jeanette DeWise?
Well, there were times that we thought it was funny, but those were the two names that I just used for them all the time over the years. So it wasn't funny and it wasn't meaningful either.
You said before that you thought it was just water off a duck's back. No big deal that you talked like that to your children.
That's what I mean. Over the years, it had no effect on anyone of any kind.
Isn't it true that every single person who knew you and who knew what was going on told you it was having a tremendous effect on these children?
Like who? No.
Like
Who?
all of your friends, like all of the psychotherapists? Wasn't Gail Forbes telling you how horrible it was that you were demeaning their father like that?
I don't know if she said that. I'm sure she thought I was demeaning their father like that.
Wasn't Patty Monahan, wasn't Helen Picard, wasn't every friend that you had, wasn't Brian Forbes asking you to please not use that language anymore?
I find this so ironic, it's not even funny. The Forbeses are the filthiest mouthed people that have ever walked the earth in front of their children on a daily basis, both of them. And the fact that they are coming in this courtroom and pretending that I'm using bad words is perverted.
Well, I don't
It's
think
weird.
anyone's pretending that you were using bad words, Mrs. Broderick, but that's a given, right? I mean, you're
Bad
admitting.
words that I called Dan and Linda all
Well,
the time.
there was quite a bit
Yes.
more than that, though, wasn't there? You didn't just call him those words. It was how you used the words. It was how you used the words to destroy the children's self-esteem.
The children's self-esteem?
Yes.
I'm not with you on this. What are you talking about?
How about when Danny asked you what the name Broderick meant, when he was doing a project for school and had to talk about what his last name meant, and you told him that it meant, and when he told you, Mom, come on, be serious, I have to do a project for school, you told him it means goddamn. Do you think that has anything to do with a young boy's self-esteem about his own name?
I don't recall this at all.
Argument is sustained.
Did you think it was a good idea to encourage the children to hate their father?
At which point?
At any point.
Yes, I thought he was being cruel and vicious and horrible to them. And I thought he was destroying their self-esteem on a daily basis. He never showed any affection. He was not at all positive with them about anything, and he actively neglected them, all areas of their life. And I didn't think they should be living with him.
Assuming that you believe that, did you still think that it was appropriate to talk to the children and to say things to them like their father is a cold-hearted bastard?
Your Honor, I have an objection. This is irrelevant.
No, sustained.
It's irrelevant?
Well, you're assuming facts, not evidence. I haven't heard any testimony like that.
Did you ever tell Rhett that his father was a cold-hearted bastard?
I know that's exactly how I felt at certain times, you know.
The question is, did you ever tell Rhett that?
I don't recall specifically telling Rhett that, but it's very likely that I did, yes.
Did you tell him he didn't belong in the slums with?
Yes, probably.
Did
I
you
didn't
tell
think he
him?
did.
You tell him that you don't have anyone that loves you or cares you over there, cares about you over there?
He didn't. He was being horribly neglected by those babysitters and by Dan and Linda. He was being left alone. He was running away. He was suicidal. He was
Did
depressed.
you think that made Brett feel better for you to keep telling him how horribly he was being treated?
Your Honor, objection. It's irrelevant.
Rhett knew how
No,
horribly.
that's relevant. You can answer that. Overruled.
Rhett knew how horribly he was being treated, and he wanted to live with me, and he was running away all the time. He knew it. I didn't have to tell him.
Did you think that it was appropriate to tell his father that he was an asshole? Tell his father to drop dead?
About particular things at certain times, I probably said those things. I did think Dan was all those things.
Did you tell him to fight his father and beat up his dad?
No, I wouldn't have ever told the boys to beat up their dad. That wouldn't have,
You would have
Made
never
any
told him to
sense.
go fight and beat up their dad?
that wouldn't have made any sense. I don't remember saying anything like that. No, I wouldn't have told two little boys to beat up their dad.
Well, you said that this conversation that you had with Danny, that we've heard the tape of, that was an aberration. Isn't it true? You had conversations like that with Danny. You had conversations like that with Brett.
In 1987, we had a lot of horrible conversations. It was a very bad time for all of us. I was completely falling apart. I couldn't get any satisfaction in the courts. We are now into 87, going into 88.
And so, assuming that
I was freaking out.
you wanted to vent those kinds of feelings, did you think it was appropriate to vent them like that with your children?
Your Honor, objection. There's no charges that the district attorney is going into. I object. It's irrelevant.
You put the relationship with the children an issue here, so I think it is relevant. Overruled, you can answer that. Do you think it was appropriate or not? Just yes or no?
Not particularly appropriate to vent them with the children, but I think it was more appropriate that the children knew what was going on and why.
And knew, for example, like you said, that as long as someone is it's okay to call them.
That's right.
And when Rhett would cry when you were in the middle of a conversation like that, you just hung up on him.
Well, I don't remember that. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of conversations, morning, noon, and night. Most of them very friendly and very good, about nothing to do with foul language or anybody's problems.
Well, it is true that besides, well, let's go back to your comment about the Fords. Didn't you have a conversation in front of Brian Fords where you were talking like that in front of his children, and he asked you to please stop it because you were using inappropriate language in front of his children?
No,
That never occurred.
no. And Brian Forbes uses worse language all the time.
I'm not talking about Brian Fords and what language he uses.
No, he knows.
Did you ever
Because
use
it would have been,
language like
it would have been
that?
very funny if Brian Forbes had said something like that to me. I would have just laughed right in his face. It never happened.
And you're saying that Brian Fords said these kinds of things in front of his children?
Yes.
Isn't it true that your children themselves asked you repeatedly to stop using that kind of language?
My children didn't much care. They were instructed by Dan Broderick to tell me to stop
Did
calling
it
him
sound
names.
to you like Danny didn't much care in that conversation about the language you were using?
It sounded to me that he was instructed by Dan to order me to stop using the language, and then I could see the kids.
Did you tell Danny that you were too embarrassed to tell anyone you knew him?
Yes,
And you don't think that had anything to do with harming his self-esteem?
I remember that day because I remember the really traumatic things. And the kids were not dressed properly. They were not acting properly. They were fighting. They were running around being wild. And I was like, you just are not the children that I used to know. You're not the children that I raised. I don't
But
even want to
Mrs.
know you people.
When you said that you were too embarrassed to even tell anyone you knew him, and when he asked you why, you said because Daddy's in his office is very embarrassing.
I don't know that those things went together at all. I remember.
Are you denying that? Let me
No.
ask you whether this conversation occurred. Well, I'm not really even interested in seeing you guys or having anything to do with that family until you get your act together. Danny didn't respond. I'm too embarrassed to even tell anyone I know you guys. He responded, why? It's not our fault. Your answer, because Daddy in his office is very embarrassing. Why? Why are you embarrassed to tell them you even know us?
Your Honor, I'm going to have an objection to this.
Sustained. It's the way you do it, Ms. Wells. You wanted to read that and ask if that conversation took place. Go ahead.
Your Honor, and if I may have a continuing objection, I'm just not aware of 100% of the account in this case.
I'm not talking about it.
We're not talking obscenity. Understand what we're doing. The issue of custody of the kids is proper cross-examination. Go ahead.
Did you tell Danny, you obviously approve, you're living over there?
I remember the part of the conversation that you first started. I remember that part, that I was very upset that they weren't the children that I had raised. If this is the same conversation, can I look at it?
Yes.
The conversation I'm talking about happened in my car with Danny, so this is a different conversation. Is this with Danny, do you know?
Yes, that's with Dan.
Yes, I said these things. October 27th, 87.
And Danny was also very, very despondent during that conversation when you were telling him about how embarrassed you were to know him, correct?
I don't remember particularly that conversation. Danny was also threatening to run away and commit suicide.
And did that have anything to do with the fact that you were telling him to do things like pour boiling hot water on Linda's?
No, none of those things ever happened, that little group you're working on there.
Did it have anything to do with
Nobody.
telling him that they had to do bad and mean and cruel and vicious and violent things to Linda before they could come visit you?
No, I told them they did not have to do what she told them. She was only a live-in office girl at the time. She was not engaged or married or anything. And she had no right bossing my kids around and making them cry. And they called her a bitch. They didn't like her. They hated her. And I said, you don't have to do what she says. She does not have to order you around.
When Danny was going to see Ruth Roth, was he telling Ruth Roth about the things that you were telling him to do to Linda?
I don't know.
Well, that Easter, that you talked about an Easter where a visitation was canceled at the last minute. It wasn't canceled by Dan Broderick, was it? It was canceled by Ruth Roth, who was seeing Danny at the time,
Not
correct?
objection, that call for conclusion.
Sustained.
Were you advised that it was canceled by Ruth Roth?
Your Honor, objection, that call for conclusion.
No, overruled on that ground. Were you advised of that?
No, what I knew is when I arrived at school.
That's enough. You answered the question.
Isn't it true that Tricia Smith had called you before you even went to school and told you that Ruth Roth had advised against the visitation?
I don't remember if Tricia called me, but when I got to school and Dan was pulling away, Dan told the children that I changed my mind. He didn't mention Ruth Roth.
How do you know what Dan told the children?
Because they called and told me that Dan said that I changed my mind about that week. And I said, I didn't change my mind.
Before you went to pick them up, though, hadn't you been advised by Tricia Smith that Ruth Roth was the one that was calling off the visitation?
I don't remember. I just went to pick the kids up like I was supposed to pick them up. And I don't remember. All I know is Dan told the kids that I changed my mind and that was wrong. I did not change my mind. And the boys were very crying and upset that I changed my mind, and I didn't.
You were aware at some point that it was Ruth Roth
Yes, later.
who canceled that visitation. It was not Dan. and it was based on what she was hearing from Danny at the time.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It calls for assumes facts, not evidence.
Well, sustained on the basis been asked and answered. She said she doesn't recall Tricia Smith telling her that.
No, I'm asking about at any point after the fact, you became aware that it was Ruth Roth,
Your Honor,
not Dan Broderick that canceled it.
Okay,
Your
well,
Honor, I object. It assumes facts, not evidence. And she knows.
No, overruled. Did you ever become aware of that, just yes or no?
Ruth Roth was not.
Just yes or no, this is
What's the
right.
question again?
Did you ever become aware that it was Ruth Roth who canceled the visitation and not Dan Broderick?
Ruth Roth could not cancel my visitation. Dan had to cancel it. It was her
Did you become
recommendation.
aware that Ruth Roth was the one that recommended that it be canceled?
Much later, but to me, it was Dan that did it. Because ultimately, it was always Dan.
You did, you've acknowledged leaving some messages on the phone answering machine at Dan Broderick's house.
Thousands and thousands. Yes.
And you did it intentionally to harass him.
Not the thousands and thousands of messages. No, some of them.
Well, let's, for example.
Oh no, you again. What do you know about clean anyway? The mere existence is a filthy statement on human life. You're like the scum of the earth. People like you are not new, you know. They've been around since the beginning of the same old story. Yeah. I wonder when my kids are coming home. Oh well. Call back later, I guess. Just to harass you.
For the record, what exhibit was that she played on?
Good question.
Your record.
Equals 55 then.
Thank you.
Obviously, you left that message just to harass Dan and Linda, correct?
No, incorrect. That was a call to my children. They were not home. I surmised they were not home, and I reached Linda, the office girl's name on the machine, which shouldn't have been there. It was a call to my kids. But I knew if the kids weren't there and I kept calling back, it would harass him that I was calling. I wasn't calling to harass him.
Well, okay, you said there at the end, I'll call back later just to harass you.
Well, I
Didn't
called
say-
back to reach the kids, but I knew if I had to call a few times before the kids got there, that it would be bothersome to him. But how would I know when the kids would be there?
I'm having so much fun. I love this machine. You suckers, you. Anyway, you remember how your favorite case was going to court, the guy who went to court to prove the other guy was an asshole and he won? I want to go to court to prove you're and I'll win. I love it. This is going to be so much fun.
Now, that was a call that was intended to harass them, correct?
I never picked up the phone to call Dan Broderick to harass him. I called to reach my children. If I got the machine, I would be mad and harassed, and I would say ugly things to him.
You said this is so much fun. You were having fun?
Obviously,
Reading
I
those
wasn't
messages?
having fun, but I knew that he would take the messages and tape them and use them against me because that's what he was doing.
You knew that these messages were harassing, correct? You knew that it was harassing.
I didn't call to harass, but when I got the machine, I was very angry, and I felt harassed first because I was interrupted in reaching my children, and out of frustration, I would say ugly things that ended up harassing him. But I had much more important things to do than to pick up the phone and bother harassing him.
You just said it again. I never picked up the phone to call Dan Broderick. I only called to talk to my children.
But if I got the machine, I talked to Dan.
This is a message to you have one hell of a nerve dumping the kids here on the sidewalk and zooming away without making any attempt to communicate with me about my plans for the weekend. Make me sick, the both of you. I have a good mind to dump the kids back on yours and drive away. Call me, we have a lot to talk about, asshole. and come pick up your 4 children that you're working so hard to have custody of. Congratulations, you can have them.
You obviously were not calling Dan Broderick's house to get in touch with the children on that phone call, were you?
The children were at my house.
So you did not just pick up the phone to call the children. You were picking up the phone to call and leave a message with Dan Broderick, weren't you?
I wasn't calling to harass him. I had real, hardcore, tangible business to take care of with that. It wasn't a
Mrs.
harass
Broderick,
call.
You said, I never picked up the phone to call
To
Dan.
harass
That's
Dan.
not true.
Oh,
Is
sorry.
it?
I meant I never picked up a phone call to harass Dan Broderick. That is a phone call that I needed to talk to Dan Broderick. But I didn't pick up the phone to harass Dan Broderick.
Okay, come get
I
the
called
kids.
to reach
I
him.
want to get rid of them, but I don't like driving to your. Hurry up, come get them.
That again was not a phone conversation or a message that you left that had anything to do with the kids, did it? You
They're
picked up
within-
the phone to call Dan.
Within moments of one another on the same day, on the same weekend where I was supposed to go to work and I was half dressed and the 4 kids are on my front lawn and Dan went with Linda to the Ritz-Carlton, but we didn't know that. So
Did
he
you-
wasn't home
Did you pick up the phone to call Dan?
to call Dan, not to harass Dan, to call Dan, to get in touch with him.
Come get the kids. Stop long enough to return my calls. I left messages on the machine with the maid, with the secretary, etc., etc. I have very important things to ask you. You're making me mad. I'll kill you.
Now, that message had nothing to do with the kids, and it had nothing to do with the kids being at your house, did it?
No.
You were calling him, you said, stop long enough to return my messages. I have very important
Right.
things to talk to you. You were calling specifically to talk to Dan Broderick, weren't you?
Right, not to harass him. I had to reach him about specific things.
You
And I
knew-
couldn't reach him at the office and I couldn't reach him somewhere else, or he wouldn't return my calls. So I called, I guess that's that machine.
You knew that saying things like stop was harassing. You knew that that made Dan Broderick angry. You knew that it was inappropriate.
This is, I don't know when it is, in late 87, but I hardly cared what made Dan Broderick angry at that point.
Did you think, when you left the message, stop long enough to return my calls, did you think that somebody who heard that would be real inclined to want to return your calls?
I wasn't real inclined to talk to him either in late 87, but I was
Was that
having
designed
problems
to
with my
give him-
house payment, the insurance, and things that I had no control over because they were in his
Excuse me, Your
name.
Honor, may I
Just,
have the witness instructed to please respond to my question?
just go ahead.
Did you think that when you left that message, stop long enough to return my calls, that was going to make him inclined to want to return your calls?
I wasn't
Yes or
inclined to
no?
want to talk to him either, no.
Well, you called and left the message.
I didn't want to
You
have
wanted-
anything to do with Dan Broderick in 1987. I didn't want to talk to him either. He had me between a rock and a hard place, and he knew it, and I had to deal with him on certain things because he made it that way, and then he refused to deal with me. And then I'd
Did
get
you leave that
hysterical.
message, Mrs. Broderick, yes or no?
Yes,
And did you say stop long enough to return my messages, yes or no?
yes,
And did you think that he was going to be inclined to want to call you back when you left that message,
No.
yes or no?
No.
I have the day off and I would really like to use the boat, my boat. How do I get the keys? Where are the keys? Will you make another set and deliver them over here so that when I want to use the boat, I can use it? Thanks, sweetie.
Did that conversation or that message have anything to do with the children or getting in touch with the children, yes or no?
I would have only used the boat with the children, but not particularly on that phone message.
Your Honor, may I have marked as another tape? People's exhibit next order.
84?
You tell me you're afraid of me. You better damn well be afraid of me. You keep going like this. That better pay this insurance bill now, or you're gonna be damn afraid of me.
Did that message have anything to do with talking to the children or wanting to talk to the children?
No, it had to do with desperation of having to deal with him.
You didn't have any problems, obviously, asserting yourself when you were angry about something. You called him up and you demanded that he did something, or you were going to do something to him, correct?
He never did anything that I demanded. He was just empty threats.
You had specifically been advised, whether you agreed with it or not, by the judge when you went through the contempt hearings, that that conduct was harassing. Using that language was harassing, correct?
Yes, and I disagreed.
In fact, the judge had talked to you about the fact that not only was it harassing and disturbing the peace of everyone in the household, but that it was obviously not good for the children to be exposed to those kinds of characterizations, correct?
I don't know if that's what the judge said, but I considered the phone answering machine and leaving me cut out of everything with no recourse was annoying, harassing, and bothering me, more than me yelling back at him was annoying, harassing, and bothering him.
It was explained to you, though, in no uncertain terms by the judge, who said directly to you, Mrs. Broderick, who is an obviously intelligent person, and who, so far as I know, functions mentally in the way that other people do.
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
Sustained.
He told you that you were clearly engaged in a pattern of conduct that was harassing and that it had to stop, correct?
And I told that judge he could sentence me to 21 years in jail and I would not stop trying to get in touch with my children, that he had
And
no
there
right to
was
cut me off from my children.
Nothing that you were ever held in contempt for trying to get in touch with your children.
Wrong.
It was for using the language that you used, correct?
It was for using the language that I used when I hit the machines that were put there for the sole and explicit purpose of keeping me from my children, which drove me crazy, guaranteed every time.
And if you knew that it was going to drive you crazy, guaranteed every time, you obviously had the ability to recognize it was going to be there and to not use that language, correct? But you did it anyway.
I wanted to get in touch with my children. I was not putting up with that.
Well, we've just listened to several messages where it's clear you didn't want to get in touch with your children. You wanted to get in touch with Dan Broderick. You wanted to make demands, and you used that kind of language.
But
And
those
you weren't out of control in those messages, were you?
I was pretty upset in those messages.
You also left those messages when it was clear that Linda Cocaina's voice was not on the machine, didn't you?
No.
Did you not leave a message on June 21st, 1987, where it starts off, "My God, did you say Kathy Lee? I'm so glad that you're using that name. It's cute." Anyway, this is a message for the, she's such a, well, that's the only word I can think of. There's nothing lower. It's clear that it was Kathy Lee's voice that was on the machine when you made that message, correct?
Sounds like it, that one.
So it didn't have anything to do with Linda's voice being on the machine that made you leave that kind of a message, did it?
What kind of a message? What's the rest of that message? Is that a message
This
to
is
leave?
a message for the,
And that's the end of it?
my God, did you say Kathy Lee? I'm so glad you're using that name. It's cute. Anyway, this is a message for the, that she has the nerve to eat off of, well, it's bad enough she's my husband, but eating off my wedding china. She's such a, well, that's the only word I can think of. There's nothing lower. Does that have anything to do with talking to Kathy Lee?
No.
But this is Mommy. I'm out of the shower now. Where are you? Because can make a choice today about staying with me or staying with the sucker.
That was a message that you left the very first thing in the morning when you called Rhett that morning, correct?
I don't know if it's the first thing in the morning.
Well, it's obviously, you're talking about what he's going to do for the day. You just got out of the shower. You have a choice of what you can do today. It didn't have anything to do with calling and not getting through. It was the first call of the morning, and that's what you left.
I have no idea. No, that call is a result of something that came right before it. I don't know what it is unless there's another message before it or something.
Excuse me so much, I don't even want to talk to you. Your voice on the machine makes me puke, but it's a little better than the...
You disgust me so much, I don't even want to talk to you. Your voice on the machine makes me want to puke, but it's a little better than the... Obviously, you're not leaving that message because Linda's voice is on the machine. It's clear that Linda's voice is no longer on the machine, and you're still leaving those messages, correct?
I think that would have been Dan's voice then.
Okay. So when it was Dan's voice on the machine, you were just as angry and left the same messages, correct?
Once again, you're doing a wonderful job of reminding me of the sequence of things
Mrs. Broderick,
and how
if
these
you could
things
just
happen.
answer my question, you left those messages when it was clear that it was Dan's voice on the machine, not Linda. Yes or no?
That particular message sounds like that, yes.
You left the same sorts of messages at Dan Broderick's office when you called his office and talked to the receptionist. You referred to Linda as the, did you not?
Maybe once.